For any of your viewers who don't know who I am, I run a YouTube channel, and I also have a BA and a master's in philosophy, and I'm studying for my PhD in philosophy, and I focus primarily on ethics. I critiqued your position mainly because you actually put it out there like in a comprehensive way, which I actually credit you for. I think you did actually a really good job breaking it down in a way that like I think it's easy for everyone to understand. I think the main issues I had with it wouldn't necessarily affect the average everyday person. I think the average everyday person has little to no bearing on philosophy at all. And I think that the way that you broke it down, it was the fact that you've tried so hard to really engage in philosophy that's kind of been your downfall a little bit. So I guess like the way I would say is my problems with your philosophy can be broken down into your three sections, which was like your meta-ethics, your normative ethics, and your applied ethics. Where would you like to begin?
Well, we're probably gonna hate each other most on the meta ethics, so let's go there.
Yeah, that sounds like the best idea. So with meta ethics, it seems that you understand everything to be based off a subjective framework. Is that right?
Yeah, basically, yeah. And this could just be to my lack of education. I've never heard any satisfying, compelling argument for why we ought to believe in one meta-ethical framework over another. So I just hand wave it all and say egoism, and then I just assume everybody else functions the same way.
Okay, actually, that's actually a great point that you just made there. You say egoism, not subjectivism, because there is actually a difference in the literature.
Okay.
Primarily, like this is one of the criticisms I made. You come across as a psychological egoist, like through and through.
Yes.
That's great. That's an objectivist. It's objective against an individual's ontology. So like, it would be your being in question that we are judging goodness of or rightness of.
Sure.
But it wouldn't be subjectivism, which would be something like non-cognitivism, where it would actually be something like quasi-realism or a more norm expressivism, which is like everything is only held to an epistemological objectivity against your like whatever you've ad hoc'd as being like your attitudes and your beliefs. But what you describe would be if you're an egoist in this understanding of internal happiness, that would be objective. It would be like, have you ever, Ayn Rand? She's a part of meme, but
I know objectivism. I used to be super big on it when I was 17. Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, she did have she did write some politics, but metaethics isn't. It is terrible, but it's not all that terrible. She wrote an essay called "The Virtue of Selfishness," and
of course.
Yeah, and that's actually it's actually a great essay for egoists. Like if anything, that sounds like your position.
The problem I have is that like I don't necessarily. So this is kind of like, it sounds dumb to say this, but like I think that there is a lot of I think that a lot of good can be found there, but it feels like most of the people that tend towards things like objectivism or egoism tend to just be really dumb and really selfish, and they don't actually buy into the things they say. That's just a position they've kind of like ad hoc themselves into because they think it gives them certain conclusions they want. So for instance, somebody might be like, I make a lot of money, I don't want to pay any fucking taxes. Oh shit, I'm gonna be an egoist because I have a big ego and I'm gonna keep it all to myself. And like that's where the thought ends basically. And it's like that, yeah. So I feel like a lot of people that play on that side of the aisle, I guess, like meta-ethically, they're literally just looking to justify them keeping as much shit for themselves as possible. Which
I would agree, but I think that's a lot of bad faith. If I'm honest, I think that a lot of it's like.
You think that's a lot of? Wait, sorry, say that again. You cut off.
I think it's a lot of bad faith for the most part. I think that a lot of it comes from that like.
Wait, from me or for them?
From them.
Oh, okay, yeah.
They're trying to justify, the overall like the libertarians trying to justify whatever they want with any means necessary, it just so happens that egoism allows them to go, well, everything I want happens to be the best thing ever anyway.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, it's not even like that. I mean, if you read like Ayn Rand, and don't get me wrong, I would like to fully disclaimer here. I dislike Ayn Rand's philosophy. Right, I'm not defending her, right? But
Mm-hmm.
if you read was it the needs of rational men do not contradict one another? So there happens to be like a form of like mutual cooperation, for mutual advantage, right?
A little bit, although she seemed, from my understanding, at a young age, she did seem to be like obsessively like laissez-faire, free market
Oh yeah,
oriented,
she is, but I
like
really
assuming
feel
that like the market would provide for the good. Maybe actually, maybe if I were to give the most charitable take to Ayn Rand, maybe Ayn Rand was actually just incredibly naive about the human condition, and she would assume that any wealthy man that saw a poor man suffering would necessarily give his money to that man or something like that, or find a job for him. I don't know. Maybe if I'm being like really charitable, but yeah, she did seem to be like obsessively free market oriented.
Oh yeah, she was free market orientated. Absolutely, I think her politics is absolutely trash, and it doesn't align with our meta ethics at all.
Yeah.
But I will say that I think that if you run with our meta ethics, what you end up with is a society that tries to structure itself in such a way that benefits every individualistic ego to the greatest possible degree. But
Yeah,
then,
some Rawlsian kind of shit. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
what I would think. Like the term I've heard used sometimes is like enlightened self-interest. The idea that being the most selfish fucker possible is actually never going to work in my self-interest. And I should be motivated to make other people around me better off because it works for me in the end too.
yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of where I took your position, to be honest. A mixture of
Yeah.
like sort of egoism and
Hmm.
Rawlsian social contract theory.
Basically, yeah.
Okay, like good. I'm glad that I'm understanding that. So,
Hmm.
like, really, I'm gonna critique you at the first point. So, um, why? So the first thing I'd say is like you had this focus on consistency. I'm just wondering why.
So I think that I'm just a principle of explosion. I think that any system that fails to adhere to consistent principles necessarily can justify anything. So that's the way I would describe it. Sure.
Okay, and would you say that so the consistency is to essentially make sure that your claims actually cohere with reality? So if to defeat the principle of explosion in that respect, so that you can actually gain, you can see whether P is or is not itself. Well, sorry, you can see that P is itself, and so you can gain information about reality that it actually coheres with reality, like knowledge.
Yeah, I would say that, I guess, if we're talking from like a logical system level. And then something else that I said that I think you took issue with was, I feel like if somebody is being inconsistent, I feel like they're not being inconsistent. Maybe this goes like my ego thing, but I feel like what they're actually doing is they're appealing to some other virtue that they are either not aware of or they haven't explicitly stated, and that's where an apparent inconsistency shows up as well.
Yeah, I actually kind
Um,
of
mhm.
agreed a little bit with that. I think what I said
Okay.
was that like someone can be like when we talk about someone being inconsistent,
Hmm.
it's whether they had an obligation to be consistent rather. And I think I was going to kind of go into the meta ethics of that, and like essentially
Hmm.
why someone like do you have to be consistent with your like second order principles when the only thing that matters is necessarily your desires if you're a subjectivist, but since you're not a subjectivist,
Exactly.
that none of that matters. So uh,
Sure. The
um
so like a really good example of this, for instance, is are you familiar with like the Supreme Court stuff going on in the United States?
um not particularly. I have the main things
Mhm.
I've gathered about the United States has just been Kyle,
Mhm.
mostly from you actually, but like not too much, like not too much on the Supreme Court.
Uh-huh. So basically, just long story short, there are like very powerful judges that we can appoint under a Democratic president. Republicans blocked one of these appointments for reasons, and now under a Republican president, they're ignoring all of those reasons, and they're going to try to appoint a special judge anyway. And for a lot of people, so a lot of people might say, well, hold on, the Republicans are being inconsistent. They have an inconsistent value system. I reject the use of that word inconsistent. I think they are being consistent. They're just not being honest about what their value is.
Yeah,
The
I would
value
agree.
isn't some adherence to like a law and order code, or law and order code or whatever, some moral code or whatever. The value is securing as much power for their political party as possible. And they're being totally consistent with respect to that, is what I would say.
Yeah, it's like corporations that try to, make campaigns that are apparently humanitarian, even though the
Mhm.
corporations themselves are creating the crises that the people are needing to intervene to fix.
Sometimes,
It's
yeah, yeah.
it's like
So
they're
it's not
not
a matter
being.
of they're being inconsistent. There is a value there that they're being consistent towards. We just don't know what it is,
Well, I would
or we're
say,
not publicly saying it.
I think at least in capitalism we can say majority of the time it's profit. It's just profit. Like,
Yeah, sure, it could be. Yeah, for sure. Exactly. Yeah.
but yeah, I would absolutely agree there. So that I'm glad that we're
Okay.
making like ground there. I
Gotcha.
guess like when you talk about internal happiness, like what do you mean?
Just there are some biological fucking things that make people happy. There seem to be like some set of conditions. So having enough food, having clothing, having recreational activities, there seem to be these like core human conditions that make us happy, and it seems like people try to pursue those things.
Right,
So
right.
mhm.
How do you know what they are?
I know what mine are, and I maybe this is kind of an ontological argument, I guess, about humanity, but I recognize that other people are structured very similar to me. Like we all have the same like biological makeup, basically. Like we have the same organs, the same sense data, and all that. So I assume that other people are structured similarly to me as well.
Okay.
Like I reject, for instance, the idea.
Oh, sorry, you've just absolutely cut out. Hello?
Sorry, hello.
Sorry, hello?
Can you hear me? Testing
I
one
can
two.
hear you now. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh
Sorry, I
yeah.
don't know what
Okay.
happened there.
Yeah, so I was just saying that like I assume that most humans like value similar things. I reject that there are groups of humans that value like physical pain or being sick all the time or stabbing their eyeballs out, like stuff like that. I think there's some similar foundation of stuff that we all chase.
Right, okay. So you
Mhm.
would say that there was like an ontology of man or like
Exactly.
humanity.
Yeah.
Okay, and then that
Yeah.
ontology is what, so like you would say your internal happiness is in relation to that ontology. So it's not
Yeah.
necessarily like, so when we say that you're an egoist,
hmm
you would have to then, would you be investigating your own ego or would you be investigating ego itself?
Can you tell me the difference between the two of these?
So ego itself would be like the unit would be like what you investigate in things like psychology, psychoanalytics, and it would be the consideration of what ego is for humanity, and like the way it manifests itself. When you talk about value responses, you talk about what is valuable towards the universality of humanity,
hmm
and you wouldn't be talking about an individualistic private ego, a particular instance of ego.
So I think maybe the latter then, rather than the former.
So you think the latter, you would say that a particular instance of ego.
No, the former then. Sorry.
Sorry.
The I guess like the broader ego of like what ontologically what like what man desires, I guess.
Right. Okay. And so when you talk about what man desires, when you talk about trying to let's say achieve that which is desirable, you would
hmm
say that the only way that you could achieve that which was desirable would be to achieve that which man desires then, because you would have to investigate that universal.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So then that's not even egoism anymore. Uh,
What would that be?
that would be objectivism. That'd be moral object. That'd be moral realism.
Okay, cool. Well, glad I didn't call myself an egoist then, because every time I call myself anything, anybody, some other PhD or master's will show up and tell me why what I am is actually something different. So
Yeah,
I
no, no,
don't use
that's
labels
that's
anymore.
that's that's fine. Like, so if you're talking
Uh-huh.
about like for example, like you have to like, and this makes far more sense if you're a Rawlsian, because when you talk about justice being like embedded within the state, although now I'm going to explain why you're going to have to drop social contract theory. So, um,
Okay.
so essentially, if you're investigating ego itself and you're trying to seek values which are universal, there's no need for the values to be cohere with individual happiness. I mean, they do in the sense that they have to cohere with all the particulars that construct the universal. So, like everyone in the state, like everyone who like is investigating in the same language game and what is being considered. But when we talk about your actual meta ethic, then and your actual like your actual system, it's not based on individual happiness. It's based upon universal happiness, because universal happiness is the only way to achieve individual happiness, and that's what we call hermeneutics, and it's the hermeneutic circle. The investigation of
Wait,
the
can we talk about this for a second? I don't
yeah.
know if I fully agree with this.
Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. No problem.
Um, Universal happiness is the only way to achieve individual happiness. I think I agree with that. Can you explain by what you mean by that?
So when we're talking about it, like your understanding of self, your understanding of notions of happiness, it's in general, whether it's
hmm
and how we actually achieve our desires and ultimately create a state worth living in. These are concepts which are, if they were held private, they would be inaccessible to any other agent, which means that like your ability to verify or falsify
hmm
any propositions
hmm
that would ultimately lead to these positions would be impossible, because they would be
Okay,
intangible to other agents, which makes them
gotcha. So,
inaccessible.
okay, so here, this might be where I trigger the fuck out of you. I don't know if I believe those things are accessible, though. No?
Well, it accessible or inaccessible.
I think that they are necessarily inaccessible. No, the thoughts or desires of other people seem to be inaccessible from one person to the next.
In which case, the only thing
In
that
every case.
well, that's the thing. In any case, that means
Mm-hmm.
that you couldn't investigate your own ego, and you could only investigate ego itself, and then apply those concepts upon yourself.
Wait, why couldn't I investigate my? Or well, when I say any person, I mean any person besides myself. Sorry.
Okay, and then so why do you think that you could understand yourself
Mm-hmm.
without concepts that would divest your experiences from the rest? Like, so for example, like let's say I wanted to see if I actually enjoyed like ice cream,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, and I'm basing that off my memory of having experiences of enjoying ice cream.
Correct.
Um, and let's say I actually wanted to see what I mean by enjoyment. Let's say I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
say what I mean by desire. All of these concepts that are mental constructs, which
Yep.
are actually ad hoc to my relationship with reality.
Okay.
When I assume like these, the way that these are structured, I can either be doing that inductively or I can be doing it deductively. If I'm doing it
Okay.
inductively, then there is nothing holding it constant. Like I'm just assuming. So like
Mm-hmm.
actually it's important to say like what do you think a concept is? Like just fundamentally.
In what context?
Like a mental concept.
Like an experience,
Like
or
like what we
or like
would
the
use in
concept of like what is ice cream,
yeah,
or
like what is ice cream, like what is a chair, like
um like a particular chair or particular ice cream, a particular
just
memory of ice cream,
your
or like the
understanding.
category of ice cream.
Yeah, like
Sorry.
that this is the thing. I would say that those categories, what you've just said, like
Yes.
when we talk about ice cream, these things, these are actually universals, right? Which like as concepts, they're specifically divesting individual
Well,
from
yeah,
individual
kind of.
experience.
Wait, real quick, just because I'm trying to make sure I'm following you. Because those aren't all universals, right? I don't think like a particular ice cream cone or the memory of enjoying a particular ice cream is different than the universal concept of ice cream, right?
Yeah, but I
Or
would
do
say
you?
that they're interrelated in the sense that like my understanding of a particular ice cream being ice cream comes from a
Mhm.
universal application which I related to other experiences of ice cream, other people's experiences of eating ice cream, other like interrelated experiences of ice cream, and this like the properties and characteristics from which we agree upon.
Do you need a universal concept to have a like personal or like an experience with a certain thing? Do you need that?
I don't think you need it
Is it
for the experience, like the
okay?
pure raw sense datum, but
Mm-hmm.
to ask and answer a question about that sense datum, yes.
Okay.
So like
Um,
if otherwise
so
it's kind of just it just happens.
Sure. All right, so earlier what you said about investigating, right? So if I were to investigate my personal experience related to like ice cream or whatever,
Mhm.
well, I would have to consult with like my experience of some qualia that I believe is only available to me personally. I don't think I can access anybody else's. I can only inductively get there. So for instance, if I were to think to myself, did I enjoy some ice cream? I can know that because I think enjoyment is like a personal experience that I have related to some qualia, and I'm the only one that has access to those thoughts. If I ask somebody else, they have to utter words to me, and then I have to make inferences or inductions based on what they say to see that's true. But I don't have access to their personal experiences ever. Is what I would say to that.
I would agree in many ways, except
Okay.
I'd say that there's a few things I disagree with. So one, I think that when you access that individualistic qualia, your
Mm-hmm.
understanding of that qualia would be through the application of concepts which allow you to analyze your experiences. Because otherwise, like you would have a memory, which is it's like I think Alistair McIntyre talks about it like this: like when you look at a sky at night and you see and you look up, what you see really is maybe black with white like pointed like white holes maybe poked through,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like the stars in the sky, and you might see clouds and all this. But really, if you take all of the linguistic concepts away from it, what you
Mm-hmm.
actually see and perceive is just a flat experience of physical data.
Sure.
As soon as you apply concepts to it, you've entered a social realm in which we agreed upon certain language criteria, certain which hold these concepts objectively, like well at least trans-subjectively.
I don't think that those concepts have anything to do with your personal experience of it, though. And I don't think that you need those concepts to have the
I
experience.
don't think you need it. Well, it depends. To have the experience of the sky, as in the raw
Mm-hmm.
sense data, no. But to have experience of a sky, Like, so for example, if you were to look at the sun, and
Hmm.
you are, let's say, like pre-linguistic, you would see like a yellow, bright light in the sky. You
Yeah.
might feel the heat, you'd have all the sense data,
Hmm.
but you wouldn't necessarily be able to understand it at all. But let's say you're an astrophysicist and you look at the sun, you're having a very different experience because now you're understanding it in a very different way, and it'll actually even just change. Like, you might have an experience of wonder, for example, which wouldn't have been present.
Yeah,
Um,
sure, but that's something that would be like something different. So I would fight. I guess so. What I'm fighting on right now is I don't think your experience is different. I think your experience is actually the exact same. You might have a different way of organizing these concepts in your head, or you might relate them to something different. But I think your experience would literally be the exact same thing.
yeah, but your understanding of experience is what's changed, isn't it?
Your understanding of experience. I'm trying to think. What I'm thinking of right now is: are you having a different understanding of that experience, or is this a second, or it's a separate experience that's happening on top of that?
Well, what I would say is this is self-consciousness. This is like your ability to hover over your own experience, and I think that's the way, like I think
Sure, you're like
Aristotle.
meta thoughts, kind
Yeah.
of, right? Wait, hello.
Hello. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh yeah.
I thought you were about to say something.
Oh no,
Yeah.
no, yeah.
Yeah.
Like to think about thoughts or whatever,
Yeah,
right?
essentially, and but it's not even just that. It's like, well, that's the thing. It's thinking about thoughts, and that's where I would say ethics comes in, because ethics would be a relation of what we call second order desires. So you have your basic desires, maybe given to you by your
Mm-hmm.
socio-political environment and nature. For example, nature might give you like sex drive, desire for food, water, shelter, so on. But how you
Mm-hmm.
express those desires, because I don't think humans have any basic instincts. I've seen no evidence that humans have an instinctual response in nature. If you throw like a naked human into nature, and they've not had any training, they're probably going to die.
Well,
Well,
okay, okay, hold on. So some of the science claims are things that I'll push back on because I'm not sure sometimes.
okay.
We definitely have a lot of instinctual drives. Um, we absolutely do.
The drives, yes, but I mean instinctual knowledge. So like a lot of animals, for example, have like instinctual reactions which are far more complex than a normal human.
Possibly. I mean, we learn more. Our brains are a little bit more malleable. But for instance, if you take a newborn child and you place it like on top of like a mother's like belly, like that newborn child without any training will crawl up the stomach of the mom to nurse without any training
But I
whatsoever.
think it's like that and
Also,
like one other,
what?
like I think, yeah, I think we'll agree that there's I think we'll agree on that. And then there's
Sure.
like almost like one other like instinctual behavior, and they're both at like the very beginning of of life. It's like there's like, and also two inborn fears, which is like the fear of falling, and
Mhm.
I can't remember what the other one is, but like they're very few.
We have instinctually the ability to survive underwater at a fetal age as well. You can teach like very young children, like 1 or 2 months old, I think, maybe 3 or 4 months old for sure, to swim, because they know how to like hold their breath and everything because they've been swimming around in a uterus and stuff. So we do have some instinctual things,
Mhm.
but admittedly far less than other animals. Although because of the structure of the brain, because we can learn more than them.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know how relevant that is, but yeah, go ahead.
But I guess what I'd say is that essentially like our understanding of how to exist within each other is essentially the point of where ethics begins. And we start teaching children how to survive from a young age, how to live within our society. We give them rules, conventions, and norms in order to guide their development, in order to make sure that they live happy and peaceful lives. Ideally, a lot of the time we actually just brainwash them and cause them a lot more misery, lead them into self-delusion and ultimately existential crisis. But sometimes we'll actually do a good job. But
Hmm.
the reality is that what we're trying to do is educate them to give them the best life possible.
Okay.
And what I would say is that all of these all of this education is in order to prepare them for the dilemma that they're going to be facing. But also what it's actually doing is implanting ways to satisfy those basic drives. So like we teach children, like you go and get food at a supermarket when you're hungry, or you go and get food from like a takeaway, or however you're raised. You get food in a certain way.
Hmm.
You tell them what food is for the first part. You actually educate them on this is food and that is not food, and that's like the basics of like giving them a palate, for example.
Hmm.
Um, you educate them on a plethora of different things, and this is what is typically thought of as like psychological sublimation. We'll sublimate their basic drives into more complex expressions of those drives, and ultimately give them the opportunity to express those drives in a healthy way.
Okay.
This is where I would say like a lot of these are typically our first order desires. Like hedonomic, what was it? I can't remember.
Hedonic?
No. Essentially given to us. It's autonomous. They're autonomously given drives and ethics. And then when we reach the age of autonomy, we start questioning these drives, and we start entering into ethics ourselves as moral agents, as ethical agents. And that's when we start questioning whether our parents actually taught what was right and wrong, and whether what right and wrong actually means in relation to achieving our own ends. And so what we do is we start seeing that we have this basic function. Now, are we achieving that function correctly? Now, I would agree that in the sense that this begins as an egoistical kind of, I have a desire, how do I achieve it in the greatest possible degree? But even at the point in every society, our understanding of ourself at the most foundational level has been impacted and is actually fundamentally dependent upon another individual. My understanding of my own ego, my understanding of my place in society, my in identity as a whole, is fundamentally a social construction, and this is what's called psychological recognition. So my understanding of self is actually an inverted image of myself in the eyes of the other. And so gaining information on my own ego is actually a ethical relationship, and the first ethical relationship that is necessary to even understand the most basic drives that I experience. To understand my relationship with, for example, food. If I understand myself as a man, I understand my relationship with food that I may like. Men are told in certain societies to consume more. Men are told that they're supposed to like certain meals like meat and so on, and then it kind of perpetuates onwards. We're given certain norms and social conventions which allow us to develop personalities and egos, but also allow us to understand those personalities and egos.
Okay.
And now, do you agree with that?
I think so. There's a lot there, but
Yeah.
we'll see where we go with it, I guess.
So if that's the case,
actually, wait, hold on. Let me try to rephrase so I can make sure that I understand.
Yeah.
Or you think I understand?
Oh, yeah, no, that's
So,
cool.
so our understanding of ourself. So a logical extreme would be that if I had a human being on a desert island that with no other humans, his understanding of himself as a human being would be fundamentally different than somebody that had a place in society that was getting their understanding of themselves would be far more influenced by what they get from other people. Correct?
Yes, and I would even go so far to say that the person on the desert island would lack what we would call not what we would call like identity. They wouldn't have an identity because they wouldn't be able to relate themselves to another individual in a socio-political environment.
I don't know if I agree with this. I'm wondering if there's a difference here, if I can use like first order and second order identities or experiences. Like, I feel like we might have that society and culture or whatever can definitely give us a sense of self. But I feel like that sense of self that you're talking about, if we're using the word self there, is a lot different than your psychological sense of self. So I'll use a drug example to explore this.
Yeah.
That if we were to remove somebody 100% out of society completely, that their sense of self would change. However, it would change in a different way than if you were to give somebody a whole bunch of psychedelic drugs that alters their sense of self. I think that these are two different sense of selves, and I think that they're worth talking about because the sense of self that I'm talking about, the sense of self that I'm talking about when we talk about exploring morality or things that come from our personal happiness, I think a lot of this is derived from that, like your psychological or biological sense of self. That these are almost necessarily culture independent. Jesus Christ, I hope not to sound like too Jungian here, but like I think that like there's a reason why so many societies have tended towards certain things that is probably indicative of like a more fundamental biological sense of self. That like it seems on a fundamental level, everybody likes to be around other humans. Everybody likes to get a certain amount of sleep. Everybody enjoys certain recreational activities. That these aren't like cultural like phenomena, but these are just like some things that we're kind of like biologically wired for.
See, what I would say is, I think you're absolutely right in differentiating the two forms of experience. What we in terms of like our experience with the phenomena, right? So like if you
Mm-hmm.
take a drug, it can modify not only the concepts in which you apply to the to reality, but it can also modify your experience of reality. So whether the concepts you're applying are actually they can apply to a multiple objects where they wouldn't have applied before, and they can also be applied like partially and differently. So you could see the same object and see it as like that does not look the same, and that can be actually, it might be that it doesn't actually physically look the same, but it can also change your thinking so that your application of a concept means that the object has been modified by the way you're actually thinking. So you might even be gaining the same, like it may look, you might even perceive it, that is the same thing, but there's something different about it. And
Hmm.
that I think that's absolutely the case.
I guess like that's something different to me is fundamentally a different thing. So for instance, I would say that in terms of like experience, a caveman looking up at the stars has the exact same experience as like an astrophysicist, but the astrophysicist has another experience that's going on top of that, basically.
See, this is the thing. I think the caveman, like it's like the caveman may see the same thing, but the caveman can't think the same thing. I think we'd agree that with that.
Yeah, but I like thoughts that we're having about what we're experiencing, I think are necessarily different or
Like a separate
lower order
experience.
things than like the experience itself is what I feel like.
I understand what you're saying. I mean, one, I think like that would absolutely, I think you'd have absolutely enraged John Stuart Mill there, who would have just said, no, they're the higher order. Like, you know, that's exactly like what he differentiates. He's like higher order. He's like, you want to go for the intellectual kind of pursuits in order to reject the let's say and actually I would probably agree in many ways, which we can get onto, because I
Mhm.
think that ultimately the hedonistic, for example, underpinnings of first principle, like first like ready to
First
hand
order
principles,
desires or whatever.
yeah, they typically lead to a sense of dissatisfaction, which we experience in addiction, in which we aren't regulating
Mhm.
our desires in a healthy way. And so when we have with justice, is usually desire regulation to
Mhm.
understand what desires are actually going to achieve a phenomenological experience which is worth achieving. What I
Mhm.
would say, like in terms of like when you separate the experiences, I would absolutely agree, and I think that the way I would separate them is the way that Heidegger separates them in Being and Time, and that's what we call ready to hand experience and present at hand experience. Ready to hand experience is the here and now. It is the ostensive understanding of reality, like the experience of what Hegel calls the immanent. So it's like literally your sense perception, your feeling of just your feelings, right? That's essentially
Mhm.
what it is. Your present at hand experience is your questioning of that experience. A good way to look at it is if you use a hammer. He says like they actually have that advantages and disadvantages in various ways, right? So if you use a hammer and you're like knocking a nail into a piece of wood, if you're using it as a tool, you're probably going to be in a ready to hand experience. You know, you're feeling the vibration of the hammer, and you get into a rhythm of hitting the nail, and that experience itself is not something that you have to think about. It's something that you do. Well, on the other hand, to understand how to make a hammer or what a hammer is, that is a present at hand experience where you analyze the actual the object itself. Even more
Okay.
an even more prevalent example is like riding a bike. If you get into a rhythm of riding a bike, but then your bike chain breaks, you flip out of your experience of in the motion riding your bike into wait a minute, what's just happened, and then you start analyzing your experience and you're actually elevated above your experience. That sense of being elevated, of being able to be elevated above your experience, I would argue is a function of language and society and social cooperation. And even if we value the lower experience, the ready to hand experience, although I think that when we're talking about experience, we're valuing both of them anyway. I think experience is one thing synthetically synthesized into what it means to be a human. But even if we valued either side of them, we would
Mhm.
ultimately require the ability to achieve certain ends. Okay, so if we see
Mhm.
that those ends are biologically given or those ends are sociologically given, either way, those ends relate to our ability to deductively investigate what those ends are. So our understanding of ego still has to relate, even if we agreed that it was individualistic, still has to be interrelated and understood in a universal way. But I would honestly say that our egos themselves typically are what we consider our identities are actually universals anyway. And that our understanding of I is actually a universal applied to our experience, which is what we call identity.
Okay. I guess I'll buy this for now. I don't want to agree with this, and then it becomes like the focal point of the argument, and then I have to go back and readdress it. But we'll see where we go from here, I guess, and
Yeah.
I'll see if I read anything I disagree with. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. And so, like, what I would say is that if you agree, and I think you already agreed, like in some respects, that you have to
Mhm.
engage with universals to understand yourself. In some respects, you wouldn't relate yourself with another individual. You see yourself as human, and you
In some
apply.
respects, yeah, for sure,
Yeah,
yeah.
so that you can understand, like, let's say, your most basic fundamental desires anyway, because otherwise you just
Mhm.
like, oh, it's just like a grunt. You feel a drive, and then you move towards like a food source or a perceived nice smell or something
Mhm.
like that, and then you just sort of kind of continue onwards. But but
Sure.
actually gain, like, actually, like, what direction is it to McDonald's right now?
Hmm.
Like, that typically causes you to have to interrelate with individuals to create a complex schemata to understand reality in a more and in a better way. And so
Hmm.
what I would say is that that very interrelation causes you, when you're trying to respect, like, for example, what is good, like you're trying to do what is good, and you
Hmm.
understand that, like, okay, I understand, like I say, first, to say that you're trying to do what is good has already elevated you to a universal standard, because you're not only trying to satisfy particular instances of desire, individual preferences as they arrive, which are non-cognitive primarily in nature. You're actually trying to satisfy a cognitive principle, good, that which is good, in which you say, like, all right, it's not the individual moment of like sensation I'm going for, it's the overall good life. I'm willing to put some work in here, for example,
Hmm.
cause myself a little bit of discomfort for a greater overall life. And
Okay.
that means that you've already unified your desires. If you've unified your desires, then that's something that is hovering over the individualistic desire itself, which means you're in a second order desire anyway. So when you're
Okay.
trying to achieve that desire anyway, that universal good, your understanding of that universal good comes from your understanding of self, it comes from your understanding of desire, and it comes from your understanding of values and so on. And
Okay.
what I would say is that those concepts themselves, your ability
Hmm.
to divest all of those things from each other, individually depend upon cooperation with individuals who have common experience of those same things. Because otherwise, you'd have no ability to understand whether you are right and wrong, whether you are applying those concepts correctly in the first place. So it would be purely inductive. And what you want is the greatest likelihood of achieving that which you actually desire, that which was going to bring you the greatest amount of happiness, that which is actually good. And so you interrelate your desire with another individual. You go, right, okay, I know I do not want cancer. And I know I do not want cancer because that guy suffering from cancer looks like he's having a really terrible time right now. Now,
Okay.
that at the most basic level is your ego interrelating with another. You've already recognized an aspect of yourself within the other, and you're reliant upon them recognizing that same aspect within you so that you're able to gain a self understanding.
Okay.
And if we agree on that, then what we have to say is that when it comes to ethics and what we're actually trying to achieve epistemologically is going to be in the same universal format. When I try and achieve, my overall ends, like, and I trying to achieve that which is good, and
Hmm.
I behave in a way that I believe will achieve a good, what I have to understand is what that goodness is. Now, if I say the goodness is whatever I want it to be, like
Hmm.
a egoist would necessarily say, like, it is my experience of good, well, then I've asserted a notion of goodness rather than allowed it to be investigated and validated within a socio-political climate. But if I engage with, if I put forward a notion of goodness, I think goodness is what is good for me. And people turn around and go, no, it's not, because it's what's good for me. And, well, they go, well, it can't be what's good for you because I have no access to that. And they go, well, I have no access to yours. And then
Hmm.
essentially your egoism breaks down because our understanding of, like, individualistic notions of good doesn't work. So what I end up having to do is, like, right, well, how can I achieve what is good for me? Well, what's good for both of us? What's good in this relationship? How do we
Hmm.
achieve that which is good? And we're able to validate our desires. Then we create a universal which is being constantly verified or falsified, or, like, not falsified, by the other party, which makes it epistemologically possible to achieve a notion of right. We are doing the right action because we are likely to achieve that which is good individualistically, and the only way that we can do that is to achieve that which is good cooperatively. But I would say that if that is the case, and you would agree with that, that's objectivism,
Okay.
and it also kind of cuts out the need for social contract theory entirely.
Why is that?
So social contract theory is dependent upon individualistic notions of ego, which are presumed to exist prior to the writing of the social contract. So society itself is supposed to be a social contract which allows the
Mm-hmm.
individual to gain their own desires. Now, what
Okay.
I'm saying is that the individual, to even understand their desires, has already entered the state.
Gotcha. Don't you feel like to like a layman you would still have to use like social contract to describe it, or
Unfortunately, laymen don't usually talk to me, or if they do, they think I'm mental.
Mhm.
So
I let me summarize your when I summarize what you're saying, I'm doing it because I don't think if I understand what you're saying, then I should be able to put it in my own words. Is why I
yeah, that's
summarize.
absolutely
Okay.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you're essentially saying that I'm arguing that we need a social contract because I'm saying that in order for me to recognize the rights of another person, I'm creating a social contract that allows me to do that. But what you're saying is actually, if you've even begun to engage in the thought process to get to a social contract, you've already done all the work that the social contract is trying to do for you. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. I, I hesitantly, probably I would agree with you. So, for instance, like if I'm jerking myself off, if I thought that I lived in a society with a ton of people that were like-minded like me when it comes to ethics, I don't think we would need a social contract because we're all kind of keeping in mind each other's desires anyway, because we don't want to fuck with each other so that we don't get
Mm.
fucked with by other people. So I think I agree with you there intuitively. It feels like I do. But I think I'll probably continue to call it a social contract because that seems to be like the easiest way to understand like reciprocated values, at least from a layman's point of view. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. I understand what you're saying. I guess the point of what I would say is that all of those laws and conventions within the social contract are still necessary. Like, for example,
Exactly.
I'm a big fan of law. Um,
Sure.
like, and in fact, I would say that if we agree upon this sort of ethical scheme,
Hmm.
schemata, it's essentially law is actually freedom if it's a rational law. So like if you agree, if we were constructing the laws democratically and we were
Hmm.
agreeing that this is the right thing to do, then obeying
Hmm.
the law would be to obey our reason, which would be self-determination, and which case we would want to obey the law. The only issue
Yeah,
is that
assuming that
like
we were
power
all
comes in and
maximally
yeah.
logical creatures, whatever law exists, we're creating these laws to expand on human flourishing or happiness or whatever. So technically, in a perfect society, these laws would be an expression of everything that we ought to be wanting to do anyway,
Yeah,
basically.
it would be individualistic freedom, which is I think the best
Sure.
argument against the libertarian. The libertarians seem to think that being unrestricted is freedom, and that they use an egoistic account like Thomas Hobbes, saying that like you are most free when you get that which is your preference, right? Like your individualistic, your first order desire.
Hmm.
When that would be like
Wait. Okay, hold on. Wait, real quick.
yeah.
Okay. Do you think a libertarian would use your own argument against you? So you're telling me you don't actually need the social contract because by the time you've gotten to the point to where you're wanting to craft a social contract, you've already done all the work anyway that the social contract would do for you.
Mhm.
Do you think a libertarian would say, well, if you had a society of maximally intelligent people that were rational actors, you wouldn't need laws because by the time you're constructing those laws, people would be acting in accordance with what those laws would say anyway?
No, because the laws themselves would be the customs and cooperation between individuals who have to still externalize their reason for it to be verified or falsified. So like no matter what, we're gonna have to cooperate. So like the idea of like an absolute anarchy in which individuals could exist as pure rational individualistic agents, what I would say is that no, because reason itself's not individual.
Hmm. Okay.
But the what I would say is that like for example me in the I would say like you could have an anarchy in like a like what I sometimes call myself an anarchist, so like libertarian socialist. But really
Okay.
what I'm talking about is democratization of everything. And I think that would be ultimate self-determination. I think it's absolutely utopian. The chances of getting to it are probably non-existent. But I'm a philosopher. If I don't talk about utopian examples, everyone's going to go and try and hit a half measure, and then they're going to get quarter measures, and then it's just going to be hell. So usually what I try and talk about is like libertarian socialism being the greatest society for self-determination. Whether it's going to happen or not, probably not. Like whatever. But like I hope so. Maybe when we'll eventually I don't know, enter some Star Trek era. But I guess anyway, back to the topic. When we talk about our understanding of self and our understanding of being like essentially fundamentally reliant upon cooperation within a society, then what we can agree if these laws would be rational constructions, but these laws wouldn't be dependent upon our having to sign a social contract. And so my understanding of like my interrelation with another individual wouldn't be because social contract theory presupposes that an individualistic egoist trying to see other people as a means to an end. Let me explain. So they would see let's say themselves as achieving, like, let's say they want, I don't know, cars, and the only way to get a car is to live in cooperation with other individuals. Some people make the parts, some people put the cars together. You get the opportunity to get wealth so that you can buy the cars and so on. All of this is made possible, and this desire can be fundamentally expressed within a society. So the egoist sees it as an opportunity to express his desires, and I would say that is quite a like narcissistic view of society, but what we would call in philosophy master-slave relationship. So it would be the ad hoc of what is good is I assume what is good in order to achieve it via society. What I would say is that society lets me investigate what is good and then achieve it, because otherwise both are investigations, and both are only possible investigations through the institutions of society, which is why you get things like the French Revolution. Ultimately they wanted to make a fairer system, a democracy. So what they did is they revolted, killed all their leaders, and then found out that when they killed all their leaders, they didn't actually know how to run a society. And so they killed everyone until they eventually put in another king and then reinstitutionalized the exact same society, maybe a bit better in the sense that they were able to conquer everywhere, but ultimately perpetuated the same system again. When in reality, all of the reasons for the revolution were tied into the institutions and why they revolted. So what they needed to do was reevaluate the institutions themselves, not destroy them, because once they destroyed their institutions, they've destroyed their reasons for revolting. And so they've ended up just creating the same society again because all of the reasons had just been destroyed. And so they kind of just went through a cycle. And that's typically what happens through a lot of societies. We'll kind of go through this cyclonic view of self-destruction until we eventually hit a point in which someone says, well, maybe we should try things a little bit differently. And then eventually we reinstitutionalize, and the reasons within our institutions kind of show like a deadlock, like, wait a minute, this isn't working out. Maybe we can change things a bit and it becomes a bit better. And that's progression. But revolution itself is fundamentally impossible. But if we agree on that, then what we would say is that social contract theory ultimately ends up creating a society which is irrational, because every individual within society is trying to achieve their own ends and assuming their own ends, in which case we end up in a state of war anyway. So social contract theory is trying to end this state of war, if we agree with Thomas Hobbes or John Locke. And ultimately, it'll only end up perpetuating a state of war. And I think the best example is probably the United States. I think that it's probably the greatest expression of liberal and classical liberal understandings of how society functions. I mean, if you look at like the primary oppositional parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, I'd say that the two greatest examples of how those parties think are Rawls and Nozick. Both of them coming from John Locke and using the philosophy of John Locke to create two separate institutions which disagree about almost everything, even though they have almost the exact same fundamental rationality at their core. And so what you have is an individualistic notion of what is good clashing with another individualistic notion of what is good. And what we have is like conflicting rationalities within institutions in the United States. Two parties.
Sure. Okay, wait, real quick.
Sorry.
One of the problems that I run into, I said this yesterday, one of the problems I run into when I get into a lot of talks with philosophers is I feel like sometimes we use words that have the same word, but they have totally different meanings. And
Okay.
sometimes I feel like when they're not contextualized in the correct way, I get really confused.
Okay.
So, for instance, when you talk about the Democrats and the Republicans
Mhm.
saying that these guys have, so you're arguing that they have totally different concepts of what good means.
I would say primarily freedom in that respect. I think that Democrats typically see freedom freedom from in
Mm-hmm,
the as in like to be uncaused, to be like um basically unpained by your desires, like, or your pains. So like,
mm-hmm,
freedom from poverty would be a typical one. Whilst freedom from the needing healthcare and so on like that. Whilst
mm-hmm,
Republicans see it as being like freedom to the ability to, and this is positive and negative freedom. The two sides of
mm-hmm.
freedom, which are actually, to be truly freedom, they need to be combined, but ultimately can propose a false dichotomy, which is kind of what I see going on within the Republicans, like, and the Democrats. One side wants to be free from like taxes, they want to be free from government control. One side wants to be free from being told what to do. They want to be
Mm-hmm.
essentially unrestricted.
Mm-hmm.
The other side wants to be free from poverty, free from illness and disease, and they want everyone to be free in that respect. And so what you have is one side wants to be uncaused. They want to be free from the desires, their sufferings, and one side wants to be unrestricted. They want to be free from the they want to be free from
Do you
the
think that these
control.
are their would you say that these are like first order desires, or because these feel to me like almost like third order desires? I feel like they don't actually have much fundamental disagreement, but rather on like further on down the line, they just disagree on the application.
Yeah,
So
I can
like for
actually agree with everything that you just said there. Like, absolutely.
okay,
I think
gotcha. Okay, just making sure. When you say like fundamental disagreements on what is good or whatever, or fundamental disagreements on like social goods, I feel like fundamentally, actually, I feel like on like almost like first and second order, they agree. So, for example, they believe that one, everybody should be healthy is a first order, and two, everybody should have healthcare. That's a second order. But then three, Democrats think that healthcare needs to come from the government. Republicans think that healthcare can be bought by individuals. So that it's like it's even like further on down the line. That's what it feels like to me.
I think it's what it is that I think there is this, and I think what is shown by, if you accept, for example, like this notion of self-consciousness being embedded in the state and our understanding of self being embedded in the state, then what we
Mm-hmm.
see is that the state itself is fundamentally the our means for achieving like our desires and like how we act in the world, which means that like I think that when you see it individualistically, if you were to get like a Republican and a Democrat in a room and you were just to actually just sincerely talk and just talk to them, they're probably going to agree
Mm-hmm.
on like almost 9 out of 10 things. Because
If
that,
you're talking like on a fundamental level, yeah,
yeah.
I would say so. I would agree with that. Yeah.
And then what you do, if you put them into two separate groups,
Mm-hmm.
and you paint one blue and you paint one red, they're probably going to kill each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is almost intentionally designed in the state. For one, I think the state is very fragmented, and I think that's deliberate. But I'm a socialist, so of course I think it's deliberate.
Okay.
But I think that ultimately as well, it comes down to the ability to understand. Let's say, for example, one of the big things is risk reward ratio. Like, these are the fundamental rationalities which are differing in these groups, and I think the expression of that is in these like more like comprehensive, like really detailed, deep, really solid disagreements in people like Rawls and Nozick. The average individual isn't going to disagree to the extent of Rawls and Nozick, not even close, but
Mm-hmm.
they have within them the same rationality. It's not going to its logical extreme. It's not going to its
Sure.
logical end. Well, like Rawls and Nozick take those extremes and then just run with them. They run with the same reasoning, and then they come
Mm-hmm.
with the two absolutely different understandings of how we should construct society, and
Structure
then they start
society.
clashing. Um,
Sure.
and I think that's essentially what goes on. Like, you've got Rawls, for example, saying that there is no risk reward ratio that is justifiable if it doesn't maximize the minimum outcome for the lowest individual. Whilst Robert Nozick sitting on the opposite side, going, well, that just assumes its end. Like, you're already assuming that we should have a society which is essentially liberal, and he's not wrong. It's just that he's also assuming, when he talks about like what's wrong. He says like, well, what's wrong with someone getting paid like an obscene amount of money for producing a product? He's already assuming the libertarian side of things as well, and he doesn't even see that the same criticism he levies on John Rawls can be levied upon himself, and we're all victims of our own thinking. But that's the whole point of a state and cooperation. The individual, the issue is that normally in a healthy state, these two oppositions would come together in sincere discourse and kind of have it out and investigate that fundamental thinking. Unfortunately, they're fragmented, and they're deliberately fragmented to the point in which each party uses slogans and terminology so they can just get both sides fighting each other over usually social policy, nowhere near economics, because they both agree that they want to be capitalist as fuck. So what they do is get them fighting over social issues to the point in which they're willing to kill each other and like, I mean, literally kill each other at some points, but you know, fight to the bitter end over it, and not actually engage sincerely with each other's reasoning. So you have this like absolutely not individualistic, but you have groups formed by almost individualistic because they're two groups that aren't willing to engage with each other. And this is another point. So then once you actually get past this sort of like individualistic egoism, you end up with another kind of egoism if it's biased towards a single group, which is equally as toxic and prejudiced. It ultimately doesn't create a concept of happiness which is actually the universal concept of happiness. It's an assumed ad hoc concept of happiness which exists within that institution. And so to get a real universal sphere in which covers the entirety of happiness, you need to assume something like subjectivity as itself, like what is good for humanity, what is good for, and I'm a vegan, so what is good for sentient animals, and that'll create the greatest likelihood of achieving that which is actually desirable.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, was there anything else you wanted to chat about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just quickly, why rule utilitarianism?
It just seems like the easiest way to explain creating consistent sets of rules for society that produces the most amount of good.
Okay, I agree with the rules. I just don't agree with the utilitarianism. Consequentialism, somewhat. I think that if we look at consequentialism, it's very justified in the sense that the consideration of consequences is essential, but not utilitarianism.
Well, I mean, like utilitarianism and consequentialism, like utilitarianism is a subset of consequentialism, right?
Yeah, it is. The difference is,
I don't know if I'd call myself a utilitarian. I don't know if I believe in measuring utility. Like that sounds like you'd almost need, like, that sounds impossible. So yeah, I mean, like, I think I usually just describe myself as a consequentialist.
If you don't believe in measuring utility, then I think it would be better to understand yourself, and it would be in relation to consequences, as what's called a threshold deontologist, understanding that you should follow the rule until you get a better understanding of the overall end, and then you reformat the rule to match that better understanding of the end, and that's hermeneutic as well. So as the institutions develop,
I'd have to. I'm familiar with what threshold deontology is. It feels like, I feel like when you're getting into the point where you're arguing that between threshold deontology or rule utilitarianism, I feel like we're so absolutely close to each other that it's like almost not even worth the distinction. Like,
I think
they feel very, very, very similar to me. But go ahead. Maybe you disagree.
The main difference, I would say, is where the reasons lie. The reasons for a utilitarian rely on the individual. The reasons for a threshold deontologist lie in the state. They lie in the rules themselves. I mean, I've heard people like ask yourself, who absolutely has, I'm not like, I mean, ask yourself, we're actually on good terms at the minute, but like, I don't know what the hell U equals P plus D is. P
yeah,
plus
that
U
was
plus
their
D,
way
that's
of
like an
trying to
absolute
explain
meme.
threshold. They were trying to explain threshold deontology, yeah.
But unfortunately, that's not, like, I think if you want a good understanding of threshold deontology, it would be like W.D. Ross, The Right and the Good, would be what I would recommend. Essentially, yeah, sorry.
My understanding very quickly is that like act consequentialism or act utilitarianism has so many problems, or like strict like utilitarianism or strict consequentialism has so many problems. Obviously, being a strict deontologist seems to have problems as well. So what we could do is we can change utilitarianism to have like this rule utilitarianism or rule consequentialism, and now we've fixed some of the problems. Or for deontology, we can have like okay, well, is it bad to kill someone? Yeah, of course. But what if you could kill one person, save 1 million people? Okay, well, fuck it. Let's have a threshold deontology. Like, it feels to me like both systems
They're trying to
What?
medicate the same problem. Like they're trying to,
Yeah,
but
they're coming at it from like different ways, and then they both end up at where like you have these two things. There's like, okay, I know I say I'm Dantelus, but actually I got a solution for that. And then the other guy's like, I know I look like a consequence, but I'm not going to do those crazy things. And then they more or less end up in like similar areas.
well, I mean, in reality, it's because they really just want to mimic the aesthetic that is virtue ethics, which is the absolute lad. And
The ethics toolbox where you get to reach in and pull out whatever arbitrary tool you need at some point in time to solve
oh
a
no,
problem
no,
because
no.
you actually
You see, this is the thing. Like, if you read someone like Alistair McIntyre, your engagement in the state is the
uh-huh.
foundation from which virtue ethics is speaking of. Because I mean, the ancient Greeks were talking about like why, like that. I mean, the whole thing was like, why are we engaged in this polis? The polis is the means to justice, and so like in order to engage with each other, we need to be sincere with each other, and so you get things like concepts of truth and like honesty with each other and true engagement towards each other's ends, and that is what we are essentially trying to relieve. I think, in terms of when it's consequentialism or deontology, we're trying to actually like, okay, we need to consider everyone in terms of our like desires and consequences equally, so that we can actually determine what will be the good life for all of us. And that's what the Greeks were actually kind of like trying to do. I just think the I think that you just get like people like Aristotle's virtue ethics. It's kind of like, it's bad because it's written 2,000 years ago by a guy that I mean, it's great in the sense like the concepts behind it, but like his actual virtues bad. But like
Mhm.
understanding, like for example, that it's twice as easy to do the wrong thing than to do the right thing is like absolutely the case. It's so easy to do the wrong thing in the sense that like you can break the rule by being either like a good way to look at it is like if you're in like I don't know, a relationship with someone, like a friend, and you
Mhm.
want to like give them a gift. If you spend all of your money on the gift and
Mhm.
you blow everything on the gift, you haven't respected yourself. You've been it's a virtue of a vice of excess. If you don't buy them a gift at all and decide to hoard all your money, it's a vice of deficiency. And it shows you
Mhm.
that there has to be a sort of fundamental relationship between the individual and the state, which actually represents their rational cooperation within the state, that they are trying to engage with other people in the most rational way possible, whilst maintaining self-respect, which is to
Yeah, I feel
understand.
like I think Singer wrote an article on this having to do with utilitarianism and a cup of coffee. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
I think so. I think he's a
I
big
think
fan
that
of. Sorry.
yeah, I was gonna say basically the argument it had to do something with like a strict utilitarian or whatever would basically say every single cup of coffee you buy is literally the equivalent of you killing a child, because every single time you buy a cup of coffee, you're condemning somebody to death that you could have otherwise like fed. And I think his argument at the end of that article is basically just like, we obviously, it's not reasonable or rational to live in a world where we're 100% committed to maximizing the outcome of like every single other person at all points in our lives, because it would leave ourselves like too miserable to function in a way that we could maximize other people's outcomes.
Yeah, I think so. But I think Singer also did write a book on Hegel, which is like I actually spoke to Singer actually on my channel, and
Mhm.
he's really big into Henry Sedgwick, who I haven't actually read, but he apparently says that like essentially we engage, like there are certain like he's a rule utilitarian essentially,
Mhm.
and he tries to say basically like rationally there has to be rules and like reasonings and like kind of standardizations of like human behavior in order to achieve maximally the likelihood of achieving the end. And I think that's what he's trying to get at. Like if we were to say like every cup of coffee was absolutely immoral, you're never having coffee again, and you alienate
Mhm.
everyone from ethics, well then ethics was pointless anyway because nobody's doing it. And I think that's somewhat right. I think that the other thing I would say though is that I think the main thing is that the ability for individuals to agree that they can be wrong is like the biggest thing for me, and that's why I'm a threshold deontologist. Because when I say like, for example, that like I think we all agree with our fundamental rules of society for most part with the laws. I mean, a lot of the laws are ridiculous, but most
Mhm.
of the fundamental ones, like do not kill, like we all agree with that so much, like that it's ridiculous. We all disagree on punishments, for example, but with like the actual fundamental rule, we agree. And it's these that's that reasoning.
Mhm.
If someone comes along and goes, well, actually, like we should rewrite the rule, because I think that it's okay to kill this person, and we think it's okay to kill
Mhm.
that person. If they do it without actually engaging within like rational discourse, we would call them mad, man. Like we'd be like, you're absolutely mental. Like you're not really engaging in what it means to like say do not kill. You're not actually you're not British. You're not American. You're thinking in a way that is so foreign and it's unintelligible to it.
Sure.
And I think that that's kind of the point of what I would say. You engage with the conceptual framework of your society to better the conceptual framework of your society, to allow you to reinstitutionalize and re-better that same framework to constantly improve the thinking and thought patterns of that overall society. And if anyone's really interested in learning about the kind of system that I would argue for, and it's a Hegelian one, then there's a article written by a guy called I think it's a guy called Dean Moyer, and it's consequentialism and deontology within Hegel's philosophy of right. And that is a brilliant piece of work explaining essentially how reason's institutional and how we need to work together to achieve when we work together to follow our duties, we actually try and achieve the overall ends of society. And I guess like one last thing before I go. So
Yeah.
you know the bubblegum thing. Do you not think that there needs to be a rationally defined limit, which would be the like what amount of force an individual should be can be expected to use? So, for example, if let's say, I think the best example, like if we were to say that the police, for example, and I think this is one of the things that like I think Black Lives Matter should be calling for, and other political organizations in America in regards to police brutality, is if there's been some research done, I think that it was saying that if you were to get the American police to have to use all means necessary, like every means necessary,
I think
for
we call
taking
these
sorry
for what?
before taking lethal force.
Yeah, we call these like I think we call these use of force policies. But basically the idea is that like there's some like chain of escalating thing that you have to exhaust before you get to like I'm killing this person.
Yeah, exactly. And if you get them to actually engage with that, you can cut police killings, like I think the evidence was to say, in half. I'm not sure how reliable that is, but it was massive.
Yeah, one of the few things, changing use of force policies, I think was one of the few things that seemed to produce really good results. Things like body cams didn't nearly as much, which is usually what everybody's calling for, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And what I would say that was essentially the ability of the individual to refer to a system which guides their behavior, which is ultimately dependent upon the rationality of the state rather than their individual subjective bias, which is, oh, this is a threat. And and I think a lot of the police in the United States, I don't think that they're all necessarily bad. Like from what I've seen, I don't know them personally, but I don't think they're all bad. But I do think many of them seem hyper vigilant. Like almost on edge, and I don't blame them. If I was like walking around in pretty dangerous areas and people have got guns, you don't know when someone's going to put it. Like I could imagine it being similar to like urban warfare. If you're walking around like a really bad neighborhood and people hate the police, it would be, and that's got some really high levels of PTSD. So
for sure. There's a lot of the other side that we don't see is like there are a lot of clips of like a police officer will pull somebody over, the guy will be like crying, the police officer's like, you need to step out, blah blah blah. It seems like really sad, and you're like super sympathetic towards the guy getting pulled over, and then the guy takes out a gun and executes the cop, and the cop is just dead. Like those things happen, unfortunately. Yeah, which I can imagine. Not to say that it excuses police brutality or whatever. Like I can imagine the job can be pretty stressful depending on like where you work.
Well, exactly. And like imagine like you've got someone under extreme duress and stress. You've got someone who's maybe got PTSD or like some sort of psychological disorder. They've maybe seen their friends get killed. They might have been they might have seen some pretty brutal homicides or something like that. They might just be like made nervous from the overall interactions with their day-to-day job. And now you're expecting them to make life and death decisions on a day-to-day basis with nothing to refer to other than that personal judgment. And that personal judgment is going to be entirely biased in the sense that they're going to go, execute them, save your life. And I think that if you were to implement a system and a scenario like use of force policy, as you say, the reason that that's cutting them in half is because the well-intentioned cop who follows the policy is actually taking the means necessary to prevent excessive force, which is when I would say like the kind of the bubblegum like sort of thing. Like at what point is the use of force to protect your property justified? I would say that then it depends upon what we agree to be in the state reasonable force to protect that level of property, and if we agree that property can be compensated in regards to. So one of the big things was like John Locke, for example, like, you know, famous social contract, like contractarian, like he
Mhm.
argued that anything that was property could be replaced, in which case let someone take it, like, if, like, as in, like, protect it if you can, but if it's going to be life or death, like if you're going to have to kill someone to protect it, you know, call the police. If they don't turn up and it's going to be life or death, you're going to have to, you know, like, knife someone to protect it. Let them take it, claim compensation later, through the court system, is what he argued, and that the court system should be like, you know, give them the compensation and then obviously punish the criminal.
There are two problems. One is compensation isn't guaranteed, right? Ever. Not in the US.
I
Although
agree.
you could argue we could remedy that, but then taxpayers would be paying that compensation, which we could argue is good or bad, I guess.
Yeah.
But then the second thing is one is compensation. No, I guess that would be the main thing, is whether or not compensation is guaranteed. I guess if compensation is guaranteed, I'd be a little bit. Oh, the second thing is that you've essentially, like, I feel like whatever you set your threshold at, you're creating a society that can basically guarantee like a permissible level of perpetual violence.
Well,
so for let's say that we've decided that property up to $10,000 can be replaced by the state, right? That's a guarantee. Well, the first thing I'm going to do tomorrow is I'm going to go out and form like a crack team of guys that break into houses and steal every single possession you have, and then walk out with less than $10,000 of stuff. Because you can never do anything ever to stop me, and then you can try to find me in the courts later. But unless I get caught, like, I'm literally like able, both legally and morally able to do this. Because it's like, oh well, it's not worth killing me over what I'm taking, so I'm just going to go and take whatever it is up to that threshold indefinitely, and I can never be punished for it.
There is a risk-reward ratio with everything we do when it comes to this stuff. I completely agree. Like, at what point do we, you know, punish a trespasser, and to what degree? Was it worth them taking the trespass in the first place? Is them rationalizing? But then, like, the issue is that, like, with it being a criminal, like, with it being criminality, you can't punish let's say you were to say, not, like, we do not compensate this kind of behavior, and instead you're able to take lethal force. Well, one, the individual who loses their life can never be compensated for that. They may have taken a risk, but the risk might have been against, let's say, like, the social circumstances of the individual, the mentally ill, so on, like that, and like so on. So
they don't deserve compensation, though, would be the argument. Right, well, you've consented essentially. So part of my thing is that, like, if you should, obviously somebody needs to be put on notice that they're going to be killed if they perform a certain action. If they consent to that, and which they do by performing that action anyway, then I mean, there is no compensation. They're not entitled to compensation.
Yeah, true. I mean, don't get me wrong. I agree, like, in the sense that, like, you don't, you know, like, you don't compensate the criminal after you send them to prison, right? I completely agree. You're actually respecting the criminal's rationality when you send them to prison, because you say, like, look, you are mature enough to know that you are committing a crime, you are doing something wrong, and you're actually capable of thinking in such a way that allows you to take responsibility for your actions. You're getting punished, and then they should be thankful for that punishment. Actually, if you believe Socrates' point, like, they should be joyful that they're being punished, because it's actually making them more rational.
No, I'll agree with that, but I know what you're getting at. Sure.
Yeah. And but don't get me wrong, I guess the issue is that, like, at what point do we allow the individual in society to take the burden of criminality as well? So, like, the suspect that someone may commit fraud, does that mean that we shouldn't, like, for example, benefit fraud? People commit benefit fraud in Britain all the time. At the same time, does that mean that we shouldn't give benefits to those people who need them? Well, I would disagree. I would say that that would be nonsense. Like, we shouldn't disadvantage the individual who is lawful and just because of the individual who would take advantage of the system. So, like, for example, like, if you weren't to give someone disability benefit because someone else down the street pretends to be disabled, then you are disadvantaging.
Yeah, no, I don't agree with that, of course, but I think these are fundamentally different questions. I think that this is a fundamentally different thing than, like, does a person have the right to defend their persons or their property?
I mean, like, because it is and it isn't, because I think you're saying, do they have the right to defend their property? You say yes, but they don't have the right to take their life. So they have the right to, like, tase them, they have the right to mace them. There's a reasonable amount of force in which they can go down, but they're not allowed to take their life. But then if you were to say, and so most individuals...
Wait, why not, though?
Well, I think that what I would say is that the individuals... one, I think they're putting their own life on the line. So I'd say that it's a bit irrational in that respect.
No. Yeah, so that's... We're not talking about, like risk, or what is the most likely to cause you to survive. I'm just talking about in terms of respect to construct a very clear hypothetical. Person is coming to burn your house down. You have a gun. You tell them stay back. If you come, I'll shoot. and then that's the scenario. You're not going to threaten yourself or whatever. Like why?
Well,
How do you compel this person
I'd
not
say
to
that
shoot?
there's kind of a risk. There's kind of a risk in regards to the other individual. One, you have to assume that they're rational. So you're assuming that the individual coming to burn your house down isn't mentally ill, isn't deluded or something like that, and isn't like acting in such a way that they are mentally diminished and incapable of taking the full culpability for their actions, in which you are the one prescribing the force. Two, I would say that
Yeah, but I mean, like, I
your
think you
use
can
of
make like
force
a good,
and the
I think
right.
you can make well, I think you can make a good faith judgment for that, but like at the end of the day, I don't know if that's your prerogative. Like, why should that be on you if
Because you
somebody
are now
else?
you're now the judge. You're like the judge, jury, and executioner. And I'd say
No,
that.
I push back really hard now against these comparisons to crime analogies. So I don't believe that you're functioning in any legal sense here, or as a representative of the state, as like judge, jury, executioner.
Right.
I don't believe that that's what's happening in these cases. I think you're just taking steps to prevent your property. So, for instance, or prevent your property or your persons from being destroyed or harmed. Like, I don't think that, for instance, you have the right to enact judgment on somebody after the fact. You can just do it to prevent somebody from doing so because you have a right to defend your stuff, I think.
Okay. Well, I guess in one respect, would you at least would you agree that the use of lethal force would have to be governed by the state at what was an appropriate, like you couldn't decide for yourself what was justified for lethal force. So if your state said that killing
Mhm.
someone over like them stealing bubblegum was unjustified, would you say that if you were being sincere to what is rational and that those arguments were being made in your state and you disagreed, but the majority of people actually agreed with that validation and you understood the arguments clearly, would you say that you should abide by the law of the state?
I don't think you're morally compelled to abide by a law. No.
See, I would
Um,
say that you are compelled to abide by the law if you can engage and understand the reasons behind it, but then you just disagree with the conclusion in the sense that you disagree that it's actually, you can say that the law itself is imperfect, but then what I would say is that you should try and campaign and to change the law and make it better, not like I'm going to do what I want, I break the law. Like,
so what about when we talk about cases where people are acting in defiance of the law that they've determined unjust, but they understand perfectly the rationale behind the law?
um it depends on the extent. If the law is directly rejecting the subjectivity of the individual, like for example, their ability to hold property, to be considered equals in society, like for example, a slave revolt,
Mhm.
they might understand that they're supposed to be slaves and they reject that they're slaves. I don't see a problem
So
there because they haven't been considered as having equal value within society, and that the society was, if the society is democratic. Now, what I would say is that because society is fundamentally undemocratic, our agreement with the laws is very tentative anyway, because we aren't the legislators and we have no control over the legislation, which kind of shows that we're being ruled and governed, and the reasoning itself is polluted by power structures, which aren't allowing us to kind of iron out these kind of issues anyway.
sure, but so like exactly what you said there in terms of like stuff that would prevent you from holding property, et cetera, right? Like I would say that like of course like this is directly what I would consider like a person that considers themselves like a property owner that you're telling has to submit to like an attacker. It seems like they would feel like their subjectivity or their right to own is being like basically destroyed there, right? Or being opposed there.
Well, I mean, to a certain degree, it's like it would be saying that they're allowed property, but they're not allowed to, like, let's say, determine justified force that individualistically. So like I think that would be fair enough. So saying
Well,
that,
but meaning if anybody shows up and denies them their right to that property, you essentially have to bow out. So, like, what right of property do you have then if it can be overridden by any other person that comes in and unjustly decides to destroy it or take it?
well, it would be like saying that someone, like, so for example, if someone breaks the law, the idea that what I would say is that this must be met with the need for compensation. Like if you followed the law and the only reason you didn't use force is because you subjected your will to the common will of the people, then the common will
Mhm.
of the people are picking up the bill. That's fundamentally the case.
Yeah, sure. So so I'll even assume that that's true, right? So then is it moral then that essentially we can have a class of people that can infinitely steal things knowing that publicly we all have to suffer for it and pay for it? Is that
Well,
like an
well,
okay
that's
world
just
to live in?
criminals committing fraud in general, though. That's why I made the fraud analogy. Like someone, breaks the benefit system like by faking an illness.
Well,
Um,
but those people are all subjected up to a maximum penalty of death as well, right? I would say that like intrinsically, anytime legal action is involved, your maximum threat is always going to be death.
I mean,
For
not in
instance,
the
if some,
UK, but in America, I think it is, isn't
no,
it?
probably even in the UK, I would imagine.
But
If the cops showed up in the UK to arrest you for fraud and you fought back and then you ran into your house and you pulled out a knife and you said you're not taking me, dead or like fuck you, if I go and it's going into body bag, I'm pretty sure in the UK even the cops would probably kill you.
it's really rare that you get. I mean, it happens. Yeah, like it does happen. Like it does.
Mhm.
But it's
It
really
is
rare.
rare, I'm
People.
sure. I
I
doubt
think
that
it's
most
like
people want to die over it.
127 people died in 10 years in police
Yeah,
custody. I think
I'm
in
sure it's
Britain.
rare, but I'm just saying that like philosophically, the underpinning of the state enacting any action against you is that if you refuse,
Yeah.
death is always the
Oh yeah,
ultimate
yeah.
consequence.
It's the monopoly of
There's never,
violence. It's the monopoly of
yeah,
violence. Absolutely. But
yeah,
then I would
and
argue
everything,
that they deserve that monopoly of violence.
yeah, and everything goes to death at the end.
Yeah.
There's never a penalty in society that if you resist hard enough, the government leaves you alone,
Yes,
right? Like
I
it will
completely
always
agree.
end in
I
like,
completely
yeah.
agree. But then I
Mhm.
think that everything that the state should be governed by, I mean, like obviously I'm talking utopian here, like would have to divest all of the, like vested power interests of society and like unbelievably biased and corrupt individuals. And if we were to have like a purely democratic, rational state, then the state using lethal force would always be justified because it would be doing so as a rational organization and have determined whether it's like, for example, I think that the police, for example, turning up in the United States, if someone pulls a gun on them, they should be able to use lethal force to protect themselves.
Mhm.
That would be in the like use of force laws. But
Sure.
then that would be defined by the state. Like it's like, for example, even when I say that individual like fighting over the bubblegum, if it's defined in the state, in the constitution of the state, that they can use lethal force to protect any and all property, and all of the individuals within the state agree upon that, fair enough. That's the way that we're going with the laws, and that's democratically socially agreed upon. Fair enough. That's rational. It's like at the same time, if it's agreed that it's not rational to go with the bubblegum and we are all engaging in the arguments in a fair democratic environment, we should just
Mhm.
follow the law. And this is what I think that we should like remove what I would call individual caprice, which is why I reject rule utilitarianism, because I think it relies so much upon the individual making the choices themselves. Excuse me. Individuals are biased as fuck. They don't understand, and I mean myself as in general, like me, everyone around us, individualistically, we are so biased and prejudiced to whatever the hell we want that we
Mhm.
don't really, and we also have like we only see the world through our own eyes. So like, and our own
I
conceptual
understand that,
framework.
but like while that is true, I guess maybe this is my inner ANCAP or some weird shit speaking in me. Like I feel like even if we all are subjective as fuck, and even if we both have like these problems, if we feel as though somebody is making a direct aggression on us, and it's understood by both parties that that's what is happening, like I just have almost no, like I almost revoke moral consideration almost to like the party that chooses to aggress on the other person. Like at the end of the day, they're the ones that are consenting to the conditions of that aggression, especially if you put them on notice. Hey, if you do this, I'm going to kill you. Hey, if you try to break in, you are going to die. Like that person is like consciously making a decision to engage with that. Like, I don't know why I should feel compelled to feel bad for this person.
You see, it's not like feel bad, but it's more of like I don't think that there can be a point in which someone actually can be revoked of ethical consideration. I think that the idea of having someone as a prisoner, having someone as someone who is deserving of punishment, is an ethical position anyway. You're saying that that individual has understood and known the laws of the land in relation to other individual, and therefore
Mhm.
is culpable for their actions, which means that they are capable, they are rational moral agents engaging in society and social discourse, and that when
Sure.
they
I'm not.
broke
I'm
them,
not
that they
talking
deserve.
about. I'm not talking about like having a prisoner or enacting law and justice, though. I'm just saying that I don't believe that it can ever be moral for me to compel another person to suffer another person. Like I just assuming that that person is doing what they can to minimize harm to the other person. So using escalating steps of force. I don't think I can ever say like, well, listen, man, like you tried what you could, but that dude, he's just going to steal your shit, and you just have to sit there and take it.
But I
Like I don't
mean,
think.
I think what you're pointing out here is maybe a point of tragedy. In which case, this is what like Hegel calls tragedy, where it says like for example, you could be doing everything right and it still not be actually justified. So in which case, I would say that then what needs to happen is the state needs to evaluate the situation and form a solution which actually encompasses the individual subjectivity of that individual who is being neglected by the state. So it's like that person who's suffering because the state isn't the way it should be. The state changes to maximize the that individual's happiness, as well as
Sure.
all the other happiness, all the other individuals within it.
What if we ran down this hypothetical though, this world where you were compensated or whatever, and you started to run into trouble where you're literally running out of money in your budget to pay for like all the thieves
Well,
that are
then,
like running through your city, like stealing stuff up to the allowed amount or whatever to
well,
not
then
be
that would be considered in the ethical consideration anyway, wouldn't it? Because you'd basically saying, right, we don't have the means to run a society like in this way, so it's pragmatically impossible. So what it is no longer an ought situation. We are no longer obligated to do this. If we are no longer able and obligated to do this, then you are no longer obligated to not use lethal force, in which case it is rational and justified for you to use lethal force.
Do you think does it feel strange or unintuitive that essentially then two criminals could commit the exact same act in separate cities, but a wealthier city might value the life of one person more because they've got the money to replace the goods, but the other city might not?
I think that what I would say is that there is a big problem with distribution, and I think that there is and ultimately of like how we consider each other in general within like the cities. Why the cities, like I would say that there is an issue there primarily. One, we could say that the issue is not economic well, it's economic in the sense that it's being perhaps one city's unjustifiably poor or whatever. But let's say it's just literally like there is actually a justifiable economic difference in what they're able to do. They're both autonomous cities with no engagement with one another, and they never will engage. They both want that autonomy. Well, the unfortunate reality is that we don't live in some sort of like sort of cloud 9 like reality where there are no consequences for our ethical judgments, and so all we can do is create the best overall society that we can given the means we have. I'm pretty sure the ancient Greeks would have loved modern medicine, but that's like not possible. Just as a society that would be
Mm-hmm.
that would like an
Okay,
ethical
so
system and a justice system
I
which is more advanced.
sure. I might not necessarily disagree, maybe then. If we lived in a perfect society where there was enough money available such that any time somebody did anything bad to you, like that property could be replaced in a way that wasn't insanely inconvenient, then maybe I would feel a little bit differently about this, sure.
Okay, and I feel like this has been a really productive conversation. I've actually really enjoyed this.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for chatting to us and everything. I guess I've got to say again, have you ever considered animals? Vegan again. I've got to throw this in here.
Fuck animals, okay?
Oh, why, man? Like, subjectivity itself has to be respected, and if animals have subjectivity, then why don't we respect them? Like, it seems like, is it not? Are you
Why do
not?
you respect animals and not plants?
Because plants don't have any measure of conscious intention, like
How
conscious
do you know that
experience.
animals have measures of conscious intention?
Because the means in which we judge individuals of having conscious intention are the same means that we judge animals. And if you
How do
say,
we judge individuals as having conscious intention?
I'd say there's two means. I'd say like one, language, as in the capacity to communicate. One, animals.
Which animals don't have. So that's
Okay, so then,
okay.
but in reality, that active communication always relates to an ontological reality, which is the individual experiencing something. And also, we would agree that pre-linguistic individuals usually have a measure of like, for example, the only thing that changes is self-awareness, but that has nothing to do with awareness itself. The awareness of the phenomenal experience, which is that basic thing which you say you're respecting, that like basic fundamental drives, is present before language. What language allows us to do is create the present at hand state, not the ready to hand state. So ultimately what we are doing in that scenario is just essentially saying that we value second order desires but not first order desires. We value self-awareness but not awareness. And what I would also say is that when we look at individuals and that capacity to have language, language itself is based off behaviorism. Understanding
Mhm.
that when we indicate certain relations with each other, when I point towards an object and I say slab, I think this is the famous Wittgensteinian example, that I'm indicating a certain object with certain metaphysical characteristics, which we then build up in the complexity of a game. But ultimately, that was based off expression and behaviorism in the first place. So if that's called like what Levinas calls the primordial expression, is the fundamental basis of ethics and interrelation, which is primarily our means of understanding ourselves and agreeing that
Mhm.
we are, self-aware and aware of whatever. So fundamentally, if we agree that we are in that scenario capable of having language and capable of progressing onwards, even though we're pre-linguistic, then we agree that animals must have a similar experience that is common to us.
How do you know ontologically that animals' experiences are similar to ours? How can you know that?
But you can't know that in general with individuals, even with language, because that's the hard problem of consciousness.
Sure.
So then we'll
So,
say that it's
but so with
probable.
individuals, the only reason we assume it is because it seems like we share like similar like biological foundations, right? We're all humans. We have like our
So if we say
experiences.
if we say materialism, I mean that then I would just
Mhm.
appeal to the fact that what we have in similar to other humans is exactly what we have in similar to animals. The capacity of having a central nervous system which can detect pain and pleasure at a complex level, which can be processed to the point of experience. The only thing that
Sure. Some of these words
differentiates.
are a little bit loosely though. Like when we say complex level, right? So like bees or like ants or certain insects can have like central nervous systems as well. They experience some level of pain and pleasure, but their
Yeah,
cognition is probably a bit different than ours. But how do we determine like what's a sufficient level for us to endow with moral consideration?
I don't think that we determine that. I think it's determined by nature. And that
What?
would be like, for example, when we say like what are we respecting subjectivity, the capacity
Wait,
to
what do you?
have.
Yeah, wait.
um
What do you mean by determined by nature? I guess I'm.
I'd just say, like, for example, like their pain and pleasure responses are given by nature. That's their evaluation of the world. If we say that value itself is embedded within the individual, which is like the foundation of what egoism and what you were saying with like the experience, then we would say that that is given by nature. That's not something that we say like they do or do not have. That value itself that is being respected in the
Yeah,
universal
but it
is.
seems. But my question is, that it seems that you value the pain of some things. But I'm just curious how you determine like whose pain you value.
I would say that you can't you can only determine you can only respect the universal, which must include everyone. And if it doesn't include everyone, then you've ad hoc and you've asserted a definition of whose pain's valuable, which means that it's not justifiable.
Sure, if that was true though, then like shouldn't we be worried about like the literal genocide against insects that's being committed on a daily basis, like across all of humanity, or is there some reason why they escape that?
No, I think we should be, but I think that ultimately, when it comes to respecting the overall, like it's like when you talk about buying the cup of coffee, I would say that our ability to live in day-to-day lives and
Hmm.
respect our own subjectivity comes at a, like, for example, if I drive a car, I don't
Hmm.
actually, I really want to, but if I drive a car, I have the chance of hitting someone. It doesn't mean that I don't respect individuals who I hit. It just means that ultimately, that is a necessary measure. I need to respect my own subjectivity to a basic level. Now, if we agree that there is
Do
a
you
fun,
think
sorry.
do you think that the existence of certain creatures are just by definition like unethical then? So for instance, the more calories you consume, the almost necessarily it's going to entail some level of destruction
Mhm.
of other sentient life. So even for instance, like agriculture for food that we eat instead of animal agriculture, it will entail the death of like some animals like in the fields or whatever.
Yeah.
Like would it be so would you be able to say that like literally the existence of like higher caloric consuming creatures is unethical because it necessitates the destruction of like lower creatures, maybe to a greater number?
I mean, like, one, I would say unethical, like, relies moral agency, but let's say bodybuilders, like, they do that all the time, right? Like, so they 10,000 calories or something a day.
Hmm.
Like, if you're like someone like Brian Shaw or something, like, like I would say that it's yeah. I mean, like, obviously it's his means of like survive, like like making money and so on in society, but. Let's say it wasn't, it was just someone like a hobbyist. I would say that, yeah, it has its ethical drawbacks, absolutely. Like the same as driving a car and so on, and I'd have to judge whether it was justified or not. I don't know if I could on the spot just judge whether it was justified because of the harm it would produce. But I'd certainly say that, let's say, a vegan bodybuilder who's consuming calories through eating plants, which produces far less crop deaths overall, because, like, obviously, having to feed an animal, like, the trophic pyramid, you feed an animal more calories to then eat them, and you get like diminished
Yeah,
energy from them.
exactly. So my understanding is that the higher you sit up on that chain of consumption, basically, you are necessarily entailing like some level of death or harm to
Yeah,
lower creatures.
yeah, I would
So it seems like you could
absolutely,
almost argue that like, especially in the case of obligate carnivores, for instance,
yeah.
things that require meat to eat, it would be like these creatures should just be eliminated from
Yeah, I mean,
existence.
like,
Like,
honestly, that I think there's a good argument for that in many cases. I think that there's a guy called I don't know if you've heard of him. What's he? Oh my God, David Pierce. I spoke to
okay,
him, and he argues for the genetic modification of all nature in general to have like different pain and pleasure responses for one, which is actually quite interesting. But I would imagine that one of the things that many people would argue for is the absolute destruction, like through via, like, not by killing them but by preventing them from breeding, of predators, and then the mediation of creatures in like the most sustainable way possible without like actually killing them, if possible, like in a
wait,
utopia.
why without actually killing them? So like, why would you, for instance, so like, I feel like under your system, it would be morally, you'd be morally obligated to genocide cats But you're saying, well, maybe just make them not breed and find ways to keep them alive. But every like day a cat lives, like multiple other sentient creatures are being killed just to sustain this cat's existence.
Oh, I would agree. I think
Uh-huh.
that I have a problem with keeping cats. Like we wanted cats. Like me and me girlfriend. Like she loves cats, and she was vegan before me. But we both agree that keeping cats is immoral. Unless there could be
Sure, but
better.
I'm not talking just keeping cats. I'm saying that it seems like you're obligated to some extent to literally genocide cats. So, for instance, if you're driving down the street and you see a cat on the road, it's like morally virtuous for you to swerve and run that cat over in order to, because that cat surviving as an obligate carnivore, every day it survives necessarily entails the death of other sentient
Well,
creatures.
I would say like running a random cat over in the street is probably more morally complex than like. I mean, if we, as a society agree that cats are unjustified, like because at the minute we all agree that like for the majority of people actually agree that it's
Wait,
justified.
I disagree with that. Let's say, for instance, that you were driving and there was a man in the road in front of you, and that man was holding a gun, and he somehow communicated to you, "I'm about to go into that house and kill that family of
Yeah,
5."
but we already agree that we are able to take actions of self-defense though in order to prevent
No.
someone from
He's
taking
not gonna
lethal
he's not gonna
force.
attack you. He's gonna go into
Yeah,
another house
well,
and kill
no,
5
but
people.
then like we agree in
Mhm.
society that we're able to take action to protect other individuals.
Mhm.
So like that's
So,
already agreed upon. Like if I was to just
well,
kill
but
like
so
my
like
neighbor's
to kill a
cat, I would
cat,
probably go to prison. Like
yeah, but to swerve a car and kill a cat, you're necessarily saving whatever meat that cat would have consumed later on in its life, and you know it will. It has to survive.
yeah,
So it
but
seems
it's
like
but it's
it would be like it would
but
always be the moral option to swerve and hit a cat.
well, it very well may be if we agreed
Mhm.
upon it as the state. But as I said, like we would have to agree like within relation to the state of whether it was
Mhm.
justified or not in the first place. But then like that's
Wait,
where I
so
was
why can't I use that? Can I just use that to escape all of veganism under that? Couldn't I just say like, oh well, I've agreed with the state that eating meat is moral,
well
so that's why I'm not a vegan.
what I would say is that all of the state typically use notions of materialism and value judgments in relation to animals all the time, and that most people one agree that animals that aren't human are already valuable. We have animal rights laws. We
Mhm.
have institutions like welfareism, which are prevalent within the state. The majority of individuals already agree that the conditions in which regard animals, regard the conditions of factory farms are insufficient for respecting animals. Animals are already respected in welfareism, and we already agree that free range organic blah 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 is better, which means that we are already trying to respect the value of animals. What I'm saying is that those institutions in general are inadequate and need to be reevaluated, and the only reevaluation for those institutions is the abolition of another institution of society, namely animal agriculture. So the end of welfareism, of what I would say, which was an embedded rationality within our culture, already entails the destruction of another institution, which is animal agriculture.
Okay. Sure, I understand. I think.
It's-
Although I don't know if I 100% agree that like it feels like you're saying, so your argument essentially is that we already understand that animal rights need to exist. We just recognize that the structure that we have right now to protect them is inadequate and it needs to be expanded, is what you're saying. But
yeah.
your basis for that is that society already recognizes there's some truth there. But I mean, I would say that while they recognize that truth, it's not to save animals insofar as we can't breed them to eat them. It's just more to avoid some level of unnecessary pain. But still, ultimately, we should eat them.
Well, I would say that that is like an ad hoc justification for our actions, and what we're doing is what cognitive what is it cognitive dissidence, where we're basically trying to have our cake and eat it too. We realize that there are fundamental values that we're trying to respect, but at the same time we're trying to achieve our own ends, which means it's the fundamental like nature of like criminality, or the fundamental nature of like acting irrationally, like the criminal who wants to steal from a market and he does so until the point in which the market doesn't exist and it's no longer there to steal from. He's acted irrationally. He's tried to respect value to the greatest degree in relation to a certain in a certain end, and ultimately undermined it. It's exactly the same in regards to ethics. We're trying to respect our own value to the greatest degree, but ultimately dismissing a fundamental aspect of that universal subjectivity from which we are trying to respect.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm just random questions. I like to test the extremes.
It's no problem.
Do you think abortion is immoral?
I think that abortion past a certain point unjustifiably is immoral. So I would say that point is sentience.
Gotcha. Which is people say it's like I think well they get one of the
It's
reasons why I don't like
yeah.
to talk about this and why I don't like to talk about veganism or abortion is because I think it's the same argument. I think that ultimately it comes down to what needs to happen for us to grant moral consideration to a thing? I think that veganism and abortion both kind of try to get at that same question, and I think it's unanswerable. Sorry to say, humans.
Yeah,
But
well, I think
it feels so. My question for babies, then, this is, I don't expect you to have like a perfect answer for this, but like, at what level would you say they have sentience? Because some people identify like the fundamental parts of a CNS as early as like 5 weeks or something, I think.
yeah, I'd say it's if I'm honest, I'd say it's messy, like the evidence,
Yeah.
obviously, whether sentience like actually occurs.
Hmm.
I've always leaned towards 12 weeks being like, from what I understood of like the development of cognition beginning.
Hmm.
But whether like obviously they're actually like aware is another thing. I think that 20 weeks
Hmm.
is starting to become like much more aware, and I think is definitely sentient by that point. Um,
Hmm.
I think that ultimately I would argue for moral hazard, aim for like have the rule so that it is the lowest point in which a being could be considered likely to be sentient. And I would say that
To
this is
avoid
why
accidentally murdering
prevention's,
or.
yeah, like prevention's better than cure. Like rather than having abortions, if we could prevent the births, that's even better.
Mhm.
And things like that. But at the same time, there might be a justifiable cause for
Having
abortion,
Wait, you
which
said having abortions? You mean having contraception?
like no, I'm saying like if we could have contraception and rather than abortions, then that's a safer
Yeah, yeah,
route to
okay, yeah.
take anyway. And then I would say that ultimately there can be justified abortions even past the point of sentience. Like for example, if there's a child that's going to be born like at the point of birth, it's going to suffer greatly and die and excruciating pain, and you're actually committing an act of euthanasia by aborting them, then you should abort them. I'd say it would be much more justified to abort them than not. So
Oh,
yeah,
wait, question.
go on then.
Do you think we can make that same thing for adults? Why can we make that? So we would never make that for an agent that can make their own choices. Why do you think it's moral to make that agent for the child?
I think
Or
that we
make the
can
abortion
make
for the
that.
child?
I do believe in euthanasia. I think that the individual who is rational and capable of making their own decisions has access to their own interests, and we respect their autonomy, and so we
Mhm.
should allow them to make that decision themselves.
Sure.
Um,
But like, so when we say erring on the side of caution, right?
mhm.
I think that if you were to take 100 people suffering from a certain illness, it's possible that 80 of them opt for euthanasia, but 20 of them opt to stay till the end for whatever reason. They hope for a
Okay.
miracle cure, they hope for a miracle intervention or something,
Okay.
right? And it seems like erring on the side of caution here would be like, okay, well, if that's the case, we probably shouldn't just instantly euthanize 100 people since we could be hitting 20 that wouldn't otherwise make that choice. Couldn't
Yeah.
we say the same for abortions of fetuses that might have certain types of horrendous disabilities or illnesses, where maybe given the choice, that person would actually choose to survive and hope for the best or whatever, and we should let them grow and make that choice on their own?
Well, I would say that there is, I think, a valuable distinction, one with humans and like self-aware humans and like fetuses, their
Hmm.
ability to make the decision themselves. But like, let's say they weren't conscious or whatever, and they weren't capable of making the decision themselves. Like, should we euthanize them or not? I think you're making an absolutely great point about what are the limits of moral rationality, and they should
Hmm.
be defined again, and that we need to have these conversations about what is a justifiable risk to take with
Hmm.
what is ethically valuable. I think that is the primary debate actually occurring between the like in terms of rationality between the, as I said, the Democrats and the Republicans, and that's probably one of the reasons why they disagree on such like fundamental things like abortion, in terms of
Hmm.
like liberty and so on, like taxation and so on like that, because they disagree fundamentally on what is a justifiable risk.
Sure. Okay. All right. Sorry, just curious. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for the conversation as well. But I guess, and I just want to clarify, from what I'm aware,
Mhm.
actually, cats can actually live a vegan diet. I don't know how good it is because I haven't done my research, but I know that like there's been vegans coming out at the minute saying that there's like a lot better vegan cat food that's just being released. And then also a better solution for the cat problem would be the production of like cultured cells, which would prevent us from having to actually kill animals for food, like for cat food.
I would have to look up the. My understanding is there might be, maybe when you say vegan, there might be like synthetic things that have been created now that emulate kind of like lab grown meat is possible. But my understanding is that there are things that are found in meat products that cats, their bodies can't create, so they need these. They're like essential. They're like essential things. I know that dogs can survive off of like vegan diets, but cats are. There's a reason they're called obligate carnivores. They literally require that type of nutrition because their body can't produce it and they need it to survive. But
Yeah.
it might be that we've created scientifically some substitutes for it now. That's
Yeah,
possible.
I don't know the full extent of it myself. Like that's why I'm not. That's why I didn't really like throw it out as a solution. Like, oh, don't worry, I just vegan cat food. Don't worry. But I do think that there is also an issue with the fact that um that we have taken it upon ourselves to breed more cats. And I think that one of the first things that needs to be done, rather than killing the cats, is to punish the people who are breeding them.
Sure.
And I think that would be like the number way to to quell the overpopulation of obligate carnivores. And
It's just like this is just a feeling that I have, but it feels strange to me that you can walk into the house of like a serial killer murderer, and you know that they're going to murder and kill more, and you have the ability to stop them, but you just choose to let them exist, I guess. Like that's every time you go to a house and there's a cat there. Like, yeah, it feels like you would be obligated to take some action.
well, I guess it's like it's like why would I? It comes down like why would I respect the life of my family over over the life of someone who's like distant, like somebody else's family? Like, what if I had like the trolley problem with my mom on the train track and like their mom and like I don't know somebody else's mom on the train track? Like, why would I choose my mom? Like, people like to say it's biased, but I would say is that I have a greater obligation to certain individuals within society, because that is how
we would,
attract them.
obviously we would agree that due to proximal things or proximity and whatnot, of course.
No,
However,
but also
very
just
rarely
reasoning.
would that same thing. Or go ahead.
I would just say even just reasoning. So like the whole thing is that when I'm doing it, like even if like I would say like even if you have a distaste for like and let's say it's not to the point in which it's causing you like psychological harm, like if you've been abused by your parents or something like that, like that's different. But like let's say everyone in like your parents were like loving, caring parents, but you just don't like them, like you don't want to be around them. I would say that you have an ethical obligation to like look after your parents and make sure they're okay, even though you don't like them. And I would say that like is the same thing. Like even if you prefer the person down the street, like you look after your parents first in that respect because you have that ethical obligation. And so what we have to do is like I would prefer, and I would argue that it would be more justified to have the cat die than to continue feeding them animal products. Like if that was necessary, like if unless we managed to like science a way out of the problem, which I would really hope we do. But let's say like rather than letting them be vicious like murderous animals, like killing like helpless creatures, then yeah, like we should take the like sometimes you're caught between a rock and a hard place, and at the end of the day, you got to do what you got to do. So like yeah, euthanize them and then talk about welfare.
So there's two things I'll push back on. Is that one, that proximity thing, usually people agree, would I rather choose like the life of my wife or the life of a stranger, right? Be like, oh, I choose like, whatever. Like intuitively, that feels good to say for 99% of cases. But when numbers start getting thrown around, I think that becomes much harder. Would I choose the life of my wife or the life of 100 strangers? Now, while we still might ultimately prefer like the life of somebody close to us, morally that starts to feel like a much worse answer. Like, holy shit, like is my wife living with like 100 people? Like, damn, that's insane. And I feel like when we say that like we're caught between a rock and a hard place, I feel like the only reason why it feels like you're caught between a rock and a hard place is because fundamentally you have a different feeling between human life and animal life. So for instance, maybe this is just me being a sociopath talking. Like if I were to walk into a house and I knew there was a person there that just walked outside and curb stomped babies all day long, and I had the ability to kill this person very easily, very cleanly, I don't think I would feel bad doing
But then
it.
if you had the ability to call the police, would you do that first?
Well, what if the police wouldn't respond?
If the police wouldn't respond, then that is again the tragedy of the state. The individual, what you've noticed is that there is.
I don't think most people would feel as though that's a truth. They'd say, "Oh yeah, of course you ought to kill that person."
Yeah,
like,
but what I'm saying is that you are justified in killing that person because that is the only means of preventing a future harm, which would otherwise be like perpetuated in the sense that
yeah, exactly.
like as in like there is no other means that you could go down and there is no future means of like claiming justice and so on. It's like with it's like and it's like everyone agrees that curb stomping babies is wrong for another thing. So like one of the things is like I agree I think what cats is doing, what we're doing when we feed cats meat is absolutely unjustifiable. Unfortunately, like 80%, like well actually more like 90% of society, it's like actually quite high for veganism here. And we're like nearly like I think 7 to 10% of population is now considering themselves vegan. But
wait, in the UK?
In the UK, 7%, yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah,
that sounds unbelievable to me.
Yeah, well, we're one of the most popular countries for veganism now. So that's like really great. It makes getting vegan food so much easier as well. My God.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, the like I totally lost me. Oh yeah, like but like when I try and like if I just say like I just killed your cat, like if you were gonna feed them beef, you're gonna feed them a cow, and I thought that was wrong. And I'm probably going to prison because the overall morality of the state hasn't caught up, I would argue, to the ethics that is the logical end of its own institutions. And this is why Hegel says like the last thing to like actually develop to a greatest extent is the law. Like the law is
Mhm.
usually the lags behind the ethics of society, but like you've just got
Yeah.
to lag with it. Like you've just got to kind of persevere. And this is why I think like people like the approach of Martin Luther King was so brilliant, because I think that regardless of everything going on, regardless of how much that black people were being absolutely exploited and everything,
Mhm.
he understood that to really resolve the issue, you had to create legislation and institutional and cultural change, which would ultimately manifest in a society which ended up in the cooperation and the consideration of all individuals. And
Mhm.
that's why I think his approach was just so brilliant compared to someone like the Black Panthers or the Nation of Islam or someone, because I think that the violent approach, which tried to destroy the institution, ultimately didn't see that the institutions of America were the only thing that could resolve the inequality that was actually occurring.
Mhm. Okay. All right. I don't have any questions for Rena. All
that's,
right.
that's cool. One last thing. Apparently, someone in my chat said that apparently Benevo cat food is suitable for cats, and the only thing that they needed to supplement was taurine. I don't know if it's true or not. I'll definitely do my
I'm
research,
almost
but
positive that it's more than taurine that cats need, but I can look into it. I'm not a 100% cat expert, but like, you know, I just know that like that's a huge thing that I know that like a lot of cat owners have gotten really irritated that cats that are put on vegan diets end up becoming sickly and disgusting, and it like just usually doesn't work out for them. But there might have been advancements or something. I'm not sure. But yeah, so I'm not 100% sure
yeah.
either.
But thanks again for having the conversation. It's been really fun, and yeah, like if you ever want to chat again, just let us know.
All right. Yeah. Thanks a lot. I love everybody. Have fun. Be careful. No way, dude. How did this get in?
Right. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't still in the chat with Destiny there, because I wasn't sure whether I should hang up or not, because I didn't catch what he said last. So I was sort of just hovering around like awkwardly. Um, so I hope you've all enjoyed this conversation. If you'd like to, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. I need to quickly check because like for whatever reason, I did actually make this stream like before I like scheduled it and everything, and it just for whatever reason just didn't work. So I had to make it again, and here we are. But I don't know what's going on with my like YouTube kind of enjoyed this settings and stuff. If you've got a question, fire it into the chat. If you want to get it answered sooner, hit the support link. Excuse me, for Streamlabs, Streamlabs below, and I will answer it first. But yeah, I'm just going to quickly sort this out while we're on the. I'm waiting. And yeah, it's £5 I think for text to speech as well. If you did want me to read it in my Geordie accent and my terrible reading skills, actually, for that matter. But I hope you've enjoyed the chat. Let's just make sure that this is actually working. Is it saving? Hopefully it's saving. I think it's saving. But yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. That worked. Right. So back to the discussion. Great discussion. Oh, thank you very much. Thanks. Yeah, if you just like it, please 300 subs in an hour. What? What? Ah, that's a lie. I think it's in that's a lie for me anyway. Damn. Damn, you probably got us there. Hiya, Philosophy Chat. Marty here. Welcome. So if anyone wants to ask us a question, just fire it into the chat, or as I said, send a super chat. And if you have a question, just fire it in now, because like the reality is I'm not going to scroll all the way back up to the start of the chat, because otherwise I'm probably going to miss like I don't know. Actually, that's not too far. Just the top chat. Let's have a look at the live chat. Um, let's just have a read down. Um, All right, so I'm gonna go back so far anyway. So if I missed your question, I'm really sorry, and as a, you know the crack. Do, do, do. Someone says he's supposed to call the cat police. I suppose in a society in which deemed the survival of cats as unjustified, there would be some sort of measure taken. So yeah, why not the cat police? Who, like, someone says that psychopaths are good liars. I don't think that. I don't know if you're talking about Destiny, but I don't think he's a psycho. A sociopath rather, as you said. I don't know if you're talking about someone else, like the context of the conversation, but I don't think he was. I know that people have called Destiny like a sociopath in the past. I don't think he is. I think he seems like quite probably more, like way more legit than a lot of the people I've debated in the past, and like discussed with in the past, like way more sincere. So yeah. The Dragon Spirit says, I have some researchers, not just taurine, but that's the main supplement they need. All right, well, if you just fire like the Dragon Spirit, if you do want to just join me Discord, maybe send us some of the research or something like that, that'd be really appreciated. Even just email us it. So I'd really like to read into this sort of stuff. I also need, I can obviously do my own research as well. Awkward goodbye. Yeah, that's me, unfortunately. 146 viewers. Not anymore, but thanks, guys. Right. Someone says Vegan Gains has a cat. What do you think about that? I think Vegan Gains has done his research. I remember Jasmine asked Jasmine in the chat. I was like, "Have you like having a cat? Is it okay?" And then he said that they basically said that they did the research and that it's absolutely fine. And asked them what cat food they had it on, and they said like Benevo and I think another one, or like that they were okay. And I don't know if they have it on Evolution cat food because they said there was only one cat food suitable for kittens. So like I don't know the crack entirely about having vegan cats. I'm going to learn it though because I would advocate for like for example my dog is vegan, and I think it would be unjustified to feed my dog non-vegan, if he can be healthy on a vegan diet. Like I'm mandating the death of another animal. So why do I value this animal more? Don't get me wrong. I do think that valuing like animals that I've like for example if I'm taking the responsibility of having a dog, I am morally obligated to look after that dog, even if it meant the harm to another. And for example, I'd say I'm more morally obligated to my dog than let's say I'm morally obligated to making sure my dog had a meal than let's say some child that I've never met. Because I've taken the responsibility of having that dog. I'd say I'll have that obligation. And I think that's given to me in the responsibilities of the state in which I was to neglect my dog, I would be punished. And I think that is whilst if I don't feed someone I've never met, I would not be punished. So yeah. Really? One second. Do. Somebody donated and said donations test. Thank you for your donation. I can see why you do that. I can totally see why you do that. Yeah. I don't know why the alert box didn't go off though. One second. I think that's why it didn't go off. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. See if I like actually one second, there's a way to test this. This might annoy everyone, so one second. Did you guys hear that?
John donated £71. This is a test donation for £71.
Meet John Locke. I don't know why it didn't go off. Sorry that. Right. Who are my top 3 philosophers? Hegel, McIntyre. Ooh. Hegel, McIntyre. I'd probably put McIntyre at number 1 now, actually, because I think he's just brilliant. Then Hegel, and then probably like Socrates, right? Because like he's just sincere to finding that universal good. Like it's all like all that he cares about. So yeah. I think that when the person donated, actually they probably didn't get like notified. Actually, I think I just realized because they donated under the limit, and I think I've just realized that. So I'll change that. Sorry, to the donator. It was I think it's a $2 donation for it to £2 donation rather for it to thingy, but I'll just put it as 0. There you go. There we go. Yeah. I do like Wittgenstein. I think Wittgenstein, unfortunately, is he's not overrated, but I think he does make some like bad points. I think that if for to use Wittgenstein correctly, there's a guy called Robert Brandom who talks about what he calls inferentialism, and he wrote a book called The Spirit of Trust. I would recommend that. Yeah, absolutely. Like that would be like Wittgenstein. Yes. Why do you think state violence is justified, but not person-on-person private violence from a moral vacuum sense? I would say that... Oh. Great discussion, man. What's your take on intersectionality? Do you think an intersectional approach on social issues is helpful? Yeah, I would say that intersectionality, right? I have like kind of 2 points on intersectionality. Thank you, Curie. Thank you very much, Curie.
Kulik donated £20.
But
I am publicly putting up a bounty of £300 if you or anyone else turns Destiny vegan.
£300. All right, I'll try my best. If Destiny goes vegan, I'll take that £300. I'm gonna what if I like make some sort of like like sort of fraudulent case and I get Destiny to declare himself vegan and I split 150 with him? Does that count? No, but thank you very much. Thank you very much. Curie, that was really appreciated, and thank you for your donation. Really appreciate it. And sorry, back to intersectionality. Essentially, intersectionality is a useful concept. I actually think I used to say that I'm not an intersectionalist. I kind of am. Like I always have been in many ways. I just don't like the way that we approach intersectionality in terms of like the left, quote unquote. So intersectionality is in the consideration of like multiple dissecting points of what would you call it, like oppression and power. Absolutely, like consider like the varying power dynamics, but like intersectionality, the way it's approached is way too simplistic. It's like, are you a certain race? Are you a certain individual? When really intersectionality should consider like socioeconomic position, place within society, interactions with other people within socioeconomic positions. So if like you're a rich white guy who is unbelievably powerful usually in society, but then your car breaks down in some sort of poor like neighborhood in which nobody knows you, have a mixed race demographic, and white people aren't necessarily, maybe it's like racist against white people, right? That society actually looks down on white people, right? Like that part of society, right? Whatever it is. You're actually at a disadvantage then, intersectionally. And that would be absolutely the case. However, if we take intersectionality to be like what it's normally portrayed as by like the average left, it's typically something that is far more simplistic, and it just kind of usually spouts off these sociological, like not philosophical claims about power, in which they argue that certain instances of let's say like certain like statistics show that there are certain power dynamics going on with no actual underpinnings, or they just spout off stereotypes and like stereotypes on a particular side. So I would say intersectionality useful. Intersectionality has never been used correctly. I think it's actually probably the only thing about intersectionality that I think is not useful is that power and our relationship and social dynamics are so complex that the useful application of intersectionality is most likely impossible. but otherwise it's a useful concept. Do I think that you should empower certain people's voices, for example? I think that that is kind of nonsensical. I think that don't get me wrong, preventing oppression, allowing people to speak when they are being oppressed and not able to engage in politics and so on, like absolutely, yeah. Like people like black people, like in the time of the civil rights movement, they needed like engagement to allow them to liberate themselves from the oppressors that were preventing them from having political discourse, which is the whole point of like the civil rights movement, which is like let black people be politically equal. And then like economically equal is another thing that needs to be discussed. But like by saying that only one group or individual can have a say, for example, normally it's like not just like amplify black voices, or amplify like you know like women's voices, or amplify victims' voices, blah blah blah. It's usually like disregard anything that is not coming from a party in that scenario, regardless of the rationality behind the argument. Well, then you're not amplifying the voices. What you're doing is you're preventing social discourse, which means that you're not being intersectional in the sense you're not actually helping the what is the rationality of the state develop by allowing an individual to engage in social discourse. What you're actually doing is allowing someone to dictate that social discourse and actually creating a power dynamic that is negatively on the opposite side. And that is my fear in many cases. And it's just you can understand how it happens because it's just a revolutionary reaction to a power system. But that means that it's negatively influenced by that power system. So whatever the power system is, then that reaction isn't, which means that it's being told what it is by what the power system is, like the structure of power. So that means like if I say that everyone must wear white, and then you come in and you will not wear white because I've said everyone must wear white, the fact that you're not able to wear white shows the fact that you're not free. You're not able to decide what you wear if it's white. I can tell you that you're not wearing white by telling you what you must do. And that's not freedom either. So yeah, that would be my point on intersectionality. But thank you for your donation. Where'd it go? Yeah, thank you for your donation, Kermageddon. Appreciate it. And thank you again, Curlicue. I hope I've said your name right. I'm really sorry if I struggle with that. But again, if anyone wants to donate and I have that question answered, go for it. But thanks again. One second. Right. Okay. I'm gonna have to get off in like 5 minutes because I think my neighbors are probably going to be getting annoyed because they knocked on my door the other day actually when I was streaming late. So I'll get off in the next 5 minutes. So if anyone wants to get that question answered, then yeah, either fire it into the chat and I'll see if I can get to it, or yeah, just ask a super chat. $500 if you get Vosh to start debating veganism again. There's no way he's going to even talk to vegans again. There's no way that he's even going to, like, the guy is just full of hot air. Like, honestly, Vosh is, I think, one of the most bad faith people I've ever seen. And like, he tried to engage with, like, for example, I made a video critiquing him. He clicked on that video and then got about 10 seconds in and then said that I was, then just went off on a tirade, like an absolute tirade, about how, like something completely unrelated, never actually engaged with it. Like the man denied the Holocaust, was willing to deny the Holocaust to defend his position. Like, he was wanting to say that truth was subjective. There's very few people that'll go down the route of saying truth was subjective. Like, and then people try to say that I cherry picked those quotes. I didn't cherry pick those quotes. Go watch the original video. He says himself multiple times that all history is a power play. Like, anyone that's saying all history is a power play, is it? I question whether it's even worth debating him. But thank you for offering the 500. Here's one. We shouldn't kill wild animals for the reason that Destiny said they don't have moral consideration. We cannot look at animals as consideration is inherently immoral. What's your take? I think that doesn't mean that their actions don't have consequences. Whether it's like we would stop a volcano if we could. We would stop like a natural disaster if we are able to. The issue is that there's no, like, we don't act because of an individual's. We're not punishing the animal by killing them. We'd be preventing them from committing a harm. That'd be the difference, right? Wouldn't be saying that they're culpable. In which case, I'd say preventing their births is again much more justified. Do I think that we should do that? And it would be, and if it was sustainable and ultimately would reduce harm, yeah, we should. That answers your question. Someone said, quick recap of the stream. So yeah, so I like to think that I engaged with Destiny's meta-ethics first, because he said that's the point that would just disagree on most. I think we actually agreed on almost all of it. I think that he ended up agreeing that that egoism leads to a form of objective, objectivism, like ethical objectivism. I'm not sure if he did or not, but that's what it seemed to be. Thanks for the detailed answer, man. Another question and related to, why do you not call yourself a feminist? Okay, so I don't call myself a feminist because I think the movement itself ultimately doesn't create a scenario which is indicative of equality. I think the movement itself is based on some kind of fundamentally questionable narratives. The main one I would say is, and at least the way it's been expressed in some of the literature, would be patriarchy. Do I think that there was a social advantage for being a man? Yes. Do I think that means that it's a patriarchal state? No. Do I think that the state has been patriarchal in many cases? Yes. But only insofar that it's been a patriarchal plutocracy. So in other words, there's been a social advantage for being a man, but an even greater social advantage for being powerful. And the way I like to describe it is, it's better to be Empress Faustina of Rome than some random slave from Gaul. Right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're male or female. The whole point is that power, money, wealth, the family we're born into matters more. Now, do I think that's fundamentally incompatible with feminism? No, that depends on the thinker. And I think that one of the biggest issues is how they understand power to be vested in masculinity. Power hasn't been vested in masculinity. Power has been vested into plutocracy. And the narcissistic, kind of power-hungry individuals at the top usually invert their like notions of value onto the rest of society. So like, they justify their position by it being like, we're men, like we're worth more, kind of thing. Like, and then that gets devalued, but then we're still in a plutocracy in which everyone's still being exploited. The issue is that I think that, don't get me wrong, I think feminism and the suffrage movement and other movements like that have done a lot of good by showing that there has been a social advantage tied to being a man, but ultimately the foundations for attacking the society's power structure as being patriarchal haven't been overall justified. That being said, I think that there has been many cases in which society has been overall patriarchal in its kind of foundation. But ultimately, again, I do think that's been related to normative constructions from institutional environments that are respecting plutocratic institutionalization, right? And so I take more of a socialist sort of socioeconomic approach, and I'd also take an approach which is more intersectional. And I think that if you take a more intersectional approach, then feminism kind of breaks down a bit. And I think that overall it doesn't, I think as well, like, its expression in the literature always seems to say, like, men aren't necessarily advantaged by patriarchy. Yet I never see very much written on that. It's always talking about female disadvantage, empowering the feminine, and reclaiming what it means to be the feminine. I never see any talk about any male disadvantage from patriarchy, quote unquote, like social hierarchization, which has caused like negative aspects to men. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that because I'm a man and I have vested interest in that. I'm saying that because, like, for example, when you look at like the statistics and you see that most men, like most suicides are men, or you see that most work-related accidents are men, and you start to see that there's a lot of negatives being associated with men that aren't being talked about, you start questioning whether they're actually even sincere to their own motivations. So that's why I don't call myself a feminist. But do I think that if we were to talk about equality as a whole, and if you were to say that feminism was about equality, then yeah, I would be a feminist. I just don't think that feminists express that equality, and I don't think the underlying concepts respect equality to the greatest degree, because I think that it misjudges the way that power is vested within society. So yeah. But don't get me wrong, I think that the underlying premise of feminism is is great. Like removing gender roles to overall create a more fair society. That'd be great. I just don't think it does that. So guys, I'm gonna have to shoot off. Yeah, I hope you've really enjoyed the stream. If you like to give it a thumbs up, please consider subscribing. And as always, try to gain some perspective.